John, chapter 11, verses 25 and 26. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Brothers and sisters, some of us have walked in today with a chair that is empty at the table, with a voice that has gone quiet in our house, with a name we can barely say without breaking. Grief is heavy. It is a storm that does not ask permission. It comes unannounced, sits down in the living room, and changes all the furniture. And if we are honest, it can make the world feel colorless and the future feel far away. But in the middle of that gray, the living Christ speaks. I am the resurrection and the life. Hear this. Death is loud, but it is not Lord. The cemetery has stones, but only Jesus has a throne. When Jesus said those words, he was standing near another empty chair. A brother named Lazarus had died. He did not hurry past the tears. He stood inside them. John, chapter 11, verse 35. Jesus wept. The Son of God did not despise the sorrow of friends. He baptized it with his own tears. If you are weeping, you are not faithless. You are standing where Jesus himself has stood. Matthew chapter 5, verse 4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Not scolded, not ignored, comforted. But what kind of comfort are we talking about? Not the comfort of denial, pretending it didn't hurt. Not the comfort of distraction, scrolling until we forget. This is the comfort of presence. The shepherd who walks us through the valley of the shadow. Not around it, not above it, through it. He does not hand us a map. He gives us his arm. Some of us carry questions that throb like a pulse. Why now? Why them? Why this way? The Gospels do not offer a spreadsheet of reasons. They offer a Savior with scars. He does not explain away death. He overthrows it. He does not say pain is good. He says pain is not God. He does not call darkness light. He becomes light in the darkness. Brothers and sisters, grief is love with nowhere to go. So let your love go to Jesus. Bring him their name. Whisper it in prayer. Say it aloud when you walk. Hold it in your hands like a picture frame and let it become an altar. He receives what you bring. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Not come when you are done crying. Not come when you have answers. Come as you are, with the ache, the anger, the quiet disbelief that this is now your life. Come, and he will give. Not rent, not lend. He will give you rest. Think of the stories Jesus told and the people he touched. He spoke of a Samaritan who crossed the road and paid the cost of love. He spoke of a father who ran to a broken son and wrapped him in a robe. He spoke of a tiny mustard seed that becomes a shelter for others. The same Jesus who tells these stories steps into ours when we cannot get out of bed. He puts bread in our hands and says, "This is my body given for you." And he puts hope in our chest and says, "This is my life breathed into you." Anchor this in your heart. The grave is a doorway, not a dead end. A hinge, not a wall. If your loved one trusted Christ, they are not less alive. They are more. Luke chapter 23, verse 43. Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Today. Not someday in a vague cloud. Today in the bright company of God. And for those of us still here, the promise is not only later, it is also now. John chapter 14, verse 27. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. Let me speak to the ache that hides behind eyes that look fine in photos. You are tired of saying, I'm okay. You are exhausted by the polite nods and the well-meant cliches. Hear me. It is okay to be undone. It is okay to sit on the floor and let the tears run hot. The church is not a museum for the tidy. It is a hospital for the broken. And your sorrow is not a problem to be fixed. It is a story to be carried by Jesus and by us together. So what do we do now? We practice humble honesty. Pray like this. Jesus, I don't know how to do this day. I don't know how to live in a world they're no longer in, but I give you my minutes. Hold me together. That is a holy prayer. You do not need fancy words. You need a faithful friend. We practice small obedience. Make the call you've been avoiding. Sit with the memory instead of running from it. Write the letter they would have been proud of. Take the walk and talk to Jesus out loud. Set a plate if you must. Tell a story about them at dinner. Let memory become ministry. Tell the goodness you saw in them, and let that goodness guide your steps. We practice mercy with ourselves and with others. Grief is not a straight road. It is a winding path with switchbacks. Some days you'll laugh without guilt. Other days you'll wonder if you said goodbye right. Be gentle. Jesus is. He is the Lord who knelt in dust to wash feet, who lingered to listen, who never hurried a human heart into healing. If he is not rushing you, do not rush yourself. We practice hope, not plastic optimism that denies the night, but the rugged hope that holds a lantern. This hope says, God is working while I am sleeping. God is close while I am crying. God is not finished while I am waiting. The same voice that called Lazarus out will call all his beloved by name. And the same hands that were pierced will one day wipe away every tear. Brothers and sisters, grief sometimes turns into guilt. I should have known. I should have done more. I said the wrong last words. Lay that down at the cross. The cross is where all our should-haves go to die, and where mercy rises to live. Jesus does not make bargains with your sorrow. He makes promises to your soul. He says, follow me, even here, even now. And when we follow, we discover a strange miracle. Sorrow becomes seed. Tears water the soil of compassion. We begin to notice other people's pain. We start crossing the road like that Samaritan, paying love forward because we have been carried by love himself. Maybe you carry anger at God, at fate, at the disease, at the driver, at yourself. Do not hide it from the Lord. Tell him. The Psalms teach us how to pray with a fist and a tear. Jesus is not frightened by your honesty. He is not fragile. He is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Bring him your anger so it does not eat your tenderness from the inside. He will not slap it out of your hands. He will take it into his. And listen, you can bless others from your broken place. Call the friend who is also grieving. Cook something simple and leave it at the door. Write a note to the nurse who cared. Ask the widow what her husband loved to do, and then do it with her. The comfort we receive becomes the comfort we give. The kingdom looks like casseroles, phone calls, benches in parks, and prayers whispered in kitchens. It looks like Jesus in us. John, chapter 11, verses 25 and 26. Hear them again as promise and invitation. I am the resurrection and the life. If you have never trusted him, this is your hour. He is not an idea. He is a person, present and willing. If you have wandered, this is your road home. If you are clinging by a thread, know this: His hand holds the other end. Before we close, take a breath with me. Inhale. Peace I leave with you. Exhale. My peace I give to you. One more time, because sometimes prayer is breath, and sometimes breath is prayer. If you are ready, pray in your own words, or borrow mine. Jesus, I bring you my loss, my love, my questions. Be my resurrection in this valley. Lead me step by step. Teach me to grieve as one who hopes. Make my hands gentle and my heart brave. Amen. And now go with this. You are not walking through a graveyard alone. You are walking with the gardener who calls your name. You are not holding memory like a weight. You are carrying it like a lantern. You are not trying to be strong. You are learning to be held. The one who wept also rose, and he will walk you all the way home. Preach is over. I have a story to tell you. They said the chapel was always unlocked. Evan found it by accident on a night when the hospital halls smelled of disinfectant and thunder rolled far off like someone moving furniture in the sky. He had come to return a plastic cup to the vending machine, as if giving it back would rewind time. The chapel door was ajar. Inside, a low lamp hummed over rows of empty chairs and a wooden cross suspended against a blue wall. It was the quietest room he had ever heard. He sat in the last row with his hands jammed into his jacket, knuckles white, jaw tight. The clock on the wall clicked like a distant metronome. He tried not to see his brother's face. It came anyway. Caleb, grinning with his crooked incisor, the one he always refused to fix because it gives me character. Evan tried not to hear the flat tone of a monitor, the sudden, polite hush of nurses when the code ended. He pressed his palms into his eyes until lights pulsed behind them. Someone shifted near the front. He hadn't noticed a person in the first row, small and square-shouldered, gray hair and a loose bun. She stood with the grace of someone used to standing for a long time in the same place. When she turned, her eyes were bright and ordinary, like the kind you trust to hold your keys. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "I wasn't trying," Evan said. She nodded, as if that made sense. "I'm Miriam," she said. "I keep the lamp on." He didn't answer. Miriam walked down the aisle and sat 2 chairs away, leaving a respectful space, as if grief was a wild animal that shouldn't be cornered. For a while they listened to the air conditioner. "Was it tonight?" she asked, voice soft enough to be mistaken for a thought. "Today," he said. "Late afternoon. A truck." The word lodged. He swallowed. He was going to pick up pizza. Pineapple and pepperoni. He always said, "Don't knock it till you try it." Evan rubbed his forehead. "We were going to watch the game." "Caleb," Miriam said, trying the name. Evan stared. "How?" "I don't know," she said. "I just ask sometimes." He let his breath fall out. "Caleb." They sat with the name like a candle between them. Miriam looked toward the cross. "When I don't know what to say, I borrow words," she said. Matthew, chapter 5, verse 4. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." She didn't say it like a spell. She said it like someone opening a window. Evan's jaw worked. "I don't feel blessed." "I wouldn't either," Miriam said. "The blessing is not that we hurt. The blessing is that love refuses to leave us inside the hurt." He wanted to argue. He wanted to say the universe was a machine, and the machine didn't care, and the cross was a piece of wood, and the only honest thing was the monitor's flat line. Instead, he said, "He was younger. It should have been me first." The words surprised him. They were heavier than he expected. Miriam folded her hands. "I don't have answers, Evan," she said. "I have a friend." John chapter 11, verse 35. Jesus wept. He didn't put a Bible verse on a bandage. He stood in the street and cried. "Then he brought the guy back," Evan said, sharper than he meant to. "I read that once. He cried, and then he fixed it." He heard his voice echo in the chapel. "No one is walking out of that room for me." Miriam didn't flinch. "I know," she said. "I hate that part too, sometimes. I want him to do for us what he did for them. Right now. In the way that feels like undoing a bad thing. Sometimes he does. Sometimes he holds us and refuses to let the bad thing be the last word." Evan pressed his tongue to his teeth until he tasted copper. "I don't know what to do tomorrow." "Tomorrow is a cruel word," Miriam said. "Let's choose a smaller one. Let's choose now. Do you want to light a candle and say his name out loud?" "I'm not religious." "You're grieving," she said. "That will do." She stood and struck a match. The sulfur flash reminded Evan of fireworks, of summers when little Caleb ran barefoot across the lawn, whooping at sparklers like a warrior with a sword. Miriam held the thin stick to a white taper. The flame caught and leaned. "Say it," she whispered. Evan swallowed. "Caleb," he said. The name sounded like breaking a bone and setting it at the same time. They watched the flame steady itself. Miriam sat down again, closer this time. "I do not want to talk you out of your ache," she said. "I only want to make sure you are not alone inside it." They talked until the thunder ended and silence sprouted. Evan told her about Caleb's crooked tooth and his terrible playlists and the way he once hugged a stranger who looked sad at the bus stop. Miriam told him about a son who had moved across an ocean and taught her the geography of missing. She did not ask him to pray. She did not ask him to explain what he believed. She kept the lamp on. Near dawn, when the first slit of blue appeared at the bottom of the chapel door, Miriam stood. "I'll be in the cafeteria at 10, she said. "It's terrible coffee. I'll buy." "I have a funeral home to call," Evan said, as if reciting a line from a play he hadn't rehearsed. "Then call," she said. "And when you can't, sit. And when you can sit, breathe." John, chapter 14, verse 27. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you." She smiled without forcing it. "If you don't have words, borrow mine. Jesus, hold me together." Evan looked at the flame, then at the cross, then at his hands. "I'll try," he said. Miriam nodded, as if a vow had been made. She left the door slightly open. The hospital woke. Somewhere, a baby cried like a trumpet made of sky. At 10, Evan found the cafeteria by following the smell of burnt hope. Miriam waved him over to a table by the window where a tree pressed its green face against the glass. She slid a cup toward him and, with the other hand, a small card with a number written on it and a single line printed beneath in neat block letters. "You are not alone." "Do you do this for everyone?" he asked. "I do it for whoever is in front of me," she said. "Today, that's you." They talked about paperwork, the way grief made simple tasks feel like puzzles with missing pieces. Miriam suggested small things: a folder for documents, a friend to drive, a list of calls. She never said "at least." She never said "should." When Evan stared at the tree and forgot to blink, she was quiet with him. When he stood to go, she said, "Will you come by tomorrow night? There's a small service in the chapel. We read names. We light candles. We say to one another what we forget alone." Evan hesitated. "Maybe." "That's a holy answer," she said. Outside, the day was too bright. Evan walked to the parking lot with the card in his pocket, touching it like a worry stone. He thought of the moment he would open Caleb's apartment to the stale air and the locked-in shoes. He imagined the bed that would still be warm if time could fold. He stopped beside his car and pressed his forehead to the roof, and for the first time since the late afternoon, he spoke out loud to no one visible. "Jesus, hold me together," he said, and waited, expecting nothing, receiving something small and stubborn, like a knot in a rope that would not come undone. He drove with both hands on the wheel as if the car might float away. The radio was off. The world flickered past in pieces. Billboards, brake lights, a man walking his dog with a paper cup of coffee. At a red light, he almost turned left toward Caleb's place, then kept going straight as if momentum could choose for him. He went home instead and stood in his kitchen with the refrigerator door open, staring at a carton of eggs until the cold stung his forearms. He closed the door. The hum of the motor sounded like a distant ocean. He tried the funeral home. The voice on the other end was kind and practiced, a voice that had said these sentences for years. He wrote words he could not stand: cremation, service, obituary. He spelled Caleb's middle name twice because his hand shook. When he hung up, he put his head on the table and breathed into the crook of his arm like a runner after the finish line. There was no ribbon, only the room and the list on a notepad that said, "Call Mom, find photo." He could not call his mother yet. He would find a photo. The afternoon hollowed out. He drove to Caleb's apartment with the key warm in his pocket. The place smelled like dish soap and laundry. On the counter, a pizza coupon lay under a magnet shaped like a slice. The shoes by the door were unlaced, waiting for feet. Evan stood in the doorway until the shape of the room stopped blurring. He picked up a hoodie and pressed it to his face. He opened the bedroom closet and put his hand flat on the shirts as if blessing them. He took down a box from the top shelf and found a tangle of cords, a notebook with crooked drawings, and a folded sheet of paper titled in block letters, "Sibling Playlist Rules." He snorted. The rules were: 1. No skipping Caleb's picks. 2. No insults during sax solos. 3. Pineapple is fine on pizza and in life. At the bottom, a crooked heart. The laugh turned into a sound he didn't recognize. He sat on the floor. He stayed there until the light changed and the room became a basin for shadows. A neighbor knocked. An older woman in a sweater that had seen many winters. "Are you Evan?" she asked. He stood and wiped at his face. "Yes." "I'm Ms. Alvarez," she said. "Down the hall. I heard—" She stopped, the word too sharp to step on. "I have casserole." She held up a foil pan as an offering. He almost said no. He almost said he wasn't hungry. Instead, he opened the door wider. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. She placed the pan on the counter and looked around as if measuring the weight of silence in square feet. "Your brother helped me carry groceries 2 weeks ago," she said. "He told me the names of my own plants because I forgot." She smiled to keep from crying. "He said the snake plant is also called mother-in-law's tongue. Imagine that." Evan made coffee he wouldn't drink. She told him she would feed his parking meter in the morning if he wanted to leave the car. She wrote her number on an envelope. Before she left, she touched his shoulder lightly, the way one might test a railing. "Dios te bendiga," she said. "God bless you." He nodded. After she left, he cleaned the counter because it was something a person could do. He found the photo. It was from a summer with a crooked tent and a sky like laundry on a line. Caleb held a fish the size of a rumor, beaming, Evan felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth like a thread he didn't cut. That night, he went back to the hospital chapel. The lamp hummed. Miriam was adjusting a small wooden stand with a shallow bowl of sand for candles. A few people already sat in the rows. An older man holding a hat in both hands, a young mother with a sleeping baby, a nurse still in scrubs. "You came," Miriam said, as if he were a sunrise she hoped for but didn't demand. "I found a photo," he said, pulling the picture from the inner pocket of his jacket. He didn't know why he gave it to her, only that he did. She held it gently, like a relic from a planet where joy was the weather. "Would you like to place it at the front when we read the names?" she asked. He swallowed. "Yes." Miriam stood at the front without a pulpit, just the wooden stand and the cross. She looked at the small gathering the way a gardener looks at plants that have survived a hard winter. "Brothers and sisters," she said, and the words did not clang. They settled. "We are here because love is heavier than our arms. We are here to be carried by a greater strength." John, chapter 14, verse 27. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you." We will read names tonight, and we will not hurry them. When you hear the name you brought, you may come forward and light a candle. She began. The names rose and hung in the room like bells with long tails. When she said Caleb, Evan stood. His knees felt like hinges, not joints. He walked forward and placed the photo on the stand. He lit a thin candle, and for a second the flame guttered, then steadied as if remembering how. He wanted to say something clever about the fish. He said nothing. He stayed until the wax began to run. After the last candle flared, Miriam spoke again. "We believe, not that we are strong, but that Jesus is near." Mark chapter 5, verse 36. "Do not fear, only believe." Belief is a whisper tonight. Whisper is enough. They sang, not polished, not in tune, but together. The older man's voice was a stone in a river. The young mother hummed so the baby slept. The nurse closed her eyes and leaned her head on her hands. Evan did not sing. He listened as if the melody might show him where the door out of this room was. When the service ended, people lingered. The nurse touched the photo and said, "He looks like he told good stories." The older man shook Evan's hand and did not let go too soon. The young mother offered a tissue without comment. Evan found Miriam near the door. "What now?" he asked, like a child who has cleaned the table and doesn't know what to do with the crumbs. "Now is slow," she said. "Now is lists and laughter when it arrives and sleep when it can. Now is remembering to eat. Now is letting people be kind to you." She tucked a piece of paper into his palm. It was a small schedule for a support group that met in a room with bad carpet and honest chairs. "And when you can, come to this. It is a place where we say the things we say only to the night." He nodded. She hesitated. "Evan, would you be willing to read a name next week? Not his yet. Someone else's. It helps to carry together." He felt resistance like a door swollen in the frame. He put his shoulder to it. "Okay," he said. On the way home, he drove past the intersection where the flowers had begun to appear, tied to a streetlight with curling ribbon. He pulled over, joined the small garden with a handful of clumsy daisies from a corner store. He stood beside strangers and read the little cards. "For our friend. For the guy who laughed at my joke. For the kid with the crooked tooth." He touched the pole, cool under his palm, and whispered a thank you to no one anyone could see. When he reached his apartment, he placed the casserole in the oven and sat on the floor with his back against the cabinet. He whispered the words Miriam had lent him. "Jesus, hold me together." He was not sure if he believed yet, only that he needed. He waited. The timer ticked. The apartment smelled like tomato and basil and the possibility of eating. Morning brought tasks. He sent the photo to the funeral home. He called his mother. She cried without apology, and he listened and said, "I know," which was all there was to say. He printed programs at the copy shop where the machine hiccuped, and the clerk apologized as if responsible for death itself. He chose flowers that Caleb would have mocked as fancy weeds. He smiled at the thought and did not shove it away. On the day of the service, the small chapel at the funeral home filled with people who carried their memories like small lanterns. Ms. Alvarez came, wearing a brighter sweater. The nurse came, off shift and bleary. Miriam came, sat in the second row, and nodded when he caught her eye. The officiant spoke in a voice that sounded like a clean shirt. Evan stood and told 3 stories. One about the fish, one about the playlists, one about the stranger at the bus stop. He did not try to make a speech. He said the name as many times as he could. At the graveside, wind pressed the coats of the gathered like a hand on a page. When the last handful of soil fell, Miriam stepped forward. She did not take the place of the officiant. She stood as a friend. "John, chapter 11, verses 25 and 26, she said, the words simple and strong. "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. The one who promised is faithful. And until he keeps that promise before our eyes, we will keep it before one another." She pressed a small wooden cross into Evan's hand, the kind cut from olive wood and smooth with the rub of many prayers. "For your pocket," she said. He closed his fingers around it and felt the shape of hope hiding in grain and curve. He did not know what came next. He knew only that tonight he would go home, and tomorrow he would try to show up. He would borrow another breath and another prayer. He would say the name again. He would keep the card in his pocket and the candle in his mind. He would keep walking. The first Saturday after the service, Evan went to the support group Miriam had circled on the paper. The room smelled like old coffee and lemon cleaner. Chairs sat in a ring, their metal legs scuffed by other sorrows. A whiteboard leaned against the wall with a marker that had lost its cap. 10 people came, then 2 more. Miriam welcomed them the way a shoreline receives waves. No surprise, no judgment. "Brothers and sisters," she said, and the phrase landed without ceremony. "We're going to speak as if we're not alone, because we aren't. When someone talks, the rest of us listen. We don't fix. We don't hurry. We tell the truth and let Jesus be faithful." She paused, then added, "Luke, chapter 24, verses 30 and 31. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them, and their eyes were opened." Sometimes he opens our eyes while we're just sitting and sharing bread. They went around the circle with names. A retired teacher, a 19-year-old with a hoodie pulled up, a woman whose sister had slipped away quietly in a hospice bed. When it came to Evan, he tried to say something like a sentence and instead said, "I miss him," which felt truer than anything else. Miriam nodded as if the room had needed that exact phrase. The 19-year-old spoke next. "My friend's name was Jordan," he said, eyes on his sneakers. "People say it was his choice. I know that. But I still feel like I should have texted. I should have known." His hands trembled in his lap. Evan felt the door of resistance again. He remembered Miriam's ask. "Would you like me to read his name next week?" he said, surprising himself. "If that would help." The young man looked up like a window had opened. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." After the group, they gathered by a folding table where someone had set out stale cookies and the promise of tea. The retired teacher tapped the whiteboard with a knuckle. "This thing ever get used?" Miriam smiled. "We use it for practical things. Lists can be holy," she wrote. "Groceries, legal papers, thank you notes, breathing." She underlined the last one twice. Evan stayed to stack chairs. When the room was almost back to empty, Miriam slipped him a slip of paper with a name and an address. "Evan," she said, "the driver who hit Caleb. His name is Thomas. His wife wrote me. She comes sometimes and sits near the back. There was no malice. There was rain, and a moment and a life changed in two directions at once." She waited. "You don't have to do anything with this. I won't mention it again unless you bring it up. Sometimes, carrying is lighter when two sets of hands find the same weight." He closed his fingers around the paper without looking at it. A tremor ran under his ribs. "I don't know," he said. "That's a holy answer," she said again. Days found a rhythm that wasn't smooth but was real. Evan returned to work in small portions, his boss letting him measure time like salt in a recipe. Carefully, not by handfuls. He found himself texting Ms. Alvarez to ask if she needed milk or bread, and stopping by with both, even when she said no. She made him sit at her small round table while she told stories about a husband who died 15 years earlier and still left his reading glasses in odd places, as if he might pop back in to scold a crossword. "Grief doesn't leave," she said, stirring sugar into coffee that tasted like courage. "It changes shapes. Sometimes it's a shadow. Sometimes it's a window. Sometimes it's a dog under the table, begging for attention. And you pretend you don't hear, but you always do." She patted his hand. "You learn to feed it what won't make it mean." On Thursday, he drove to Caleb's apartment with boxes. He packed t-shirts that still held the outline of shoulders, tossed mismatched socks into a pile, paused over a guitar pick he found under the couch like a dropped coin from a different country. In a kitchen drawer, he found a letter addressed to Dad in Caleb's slanted handwriting. It was stamped but not mailed. He sat on the couch and read. It was not angry. It was a bridge. It said, "I want to try again." It said, "I don't know how, but I want to." It said, "I love you, even if." Evan folded the letter back along the creases and put it in his pocket beside the small olive wood cross. He hadn't talked to their father in nearly 3 years. The last words had been brittle. He stared at the closed door of the future and did not try the knob. That night, storm clouds stacked like mountains. He went to the chapel early. Miriam was there, of course, checking the lamp, setting out the shallow bowl of sand. She glanced at him and then at the sky. "It will be loud," she said. "Let heaven throw its voice. We'll still read names." When the circle formed, the 19-year-old with the hoodie, his name was Theo, sat one seat away from Evan. He handed Evan a card with Jordan, written in careful block letters. When Miriam reached the end of the second page of names, she nodded at Evan. He stood and read, "Jordan." His voice didn't shake, but something inside him did. Theo leaned forward, lit a candle, and blew out the match with a reverence that looked like anger learning to bow. After, they lingered. Miriam spoke to the group about breath. "Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, she said softly. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Sometimes rest is as simple as this. 3 breaths together. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 6. She led them through it. Not as a trick, but as a practice. The room seemed to deepen. Evan walked out into rain and found himself driving a route he didn't plan. He parked in front of a small house with peeling paint and a porch light that buzzed. He sat with the engine ticking. The paper with the name and address was still in his wallet, though he hadn't looked at it since. He did not need to. The number on the curb matched. He put his forehead on the steering wheel and stayed. He didn't knock that night. He drove home, sat on the floor, and stared at the letter to Dad. He took out his phone, typed his father's number for the first time in years, and erased it. He placed the phone face down and whispered, "Jesus, hold me together." It was becoming a liturgy between him and the dark. On Sunday, he arrived early to help. Miriam handed him a ring of keys and a simple instruction. "Will you keep the lamp on this week?" she asked. "I'll be at a conference 2 nights." He turned the key in the chapel's door, like a person learning to open a heart. He checked the oil in the lamp, trimmed the wick the way Miriam had taught him, swept the entry where leaves collected. A woman wandered in at midnight with mascara like small storms under her eyes and asked if he was the priest. "No," he said. "Just someone who can sit." They sat. She told him about a child who had moved to another state and how the quiet was too big. He did not try to solve distances. He listened. When she ran out of sentences, he borrowed one. "John, chapter 14, verse 27, he said, the words unfamiliar on his tongue but not unwelcome. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you." He felt like a thief returning something he'd once stolen from himself. The next afternoon, after he took out the trash and returned a call from the funeral home about a receipt, he drove back to the small house. The porch light buzzed like a nervous insect. He climbed the 3 steps and knocked. He almost ran before the door opened. A woman answered. Brunette curls pulled into a tired ponytail. She was younger than he expected, older than grief should allow. Behind her, a little girl sat on the floor with crayons spread like a rainbow after the rain hasn't finished. "Hi," the woman said, wary and kind at once. "My name is Evan," he said. He swallowed. "I'm Caleb's brother." Her hand went to her mouth and stayed there. "I'm Rosa," she said finally. "I'm Thomas's wife." A beat. He's not here right now. This is hard." She stepped back without thinking, making room that didn't exist a minute ago. "Do you want to come in?" "You don't have to." "I don't know," he said, but his feet moved forward. The little girl looked up and showed him a drawing of stick figures, holding candles taller than they were. "Those are names," she said solemnly. "We say the names." He felt the knot in his chest shift, not loosen. Not yet. Shift. He crouched. "They're beautiful," he said. Rosa set 2 mugs on a low table, then sat on the edge of a chair like someone who might need to stand at any second. "Thomas wanted to write to you," she said. "He has been. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't know what to do with his hands. He prays without knowing how. He would come now if he could." "I don't know why I'm here," Evan said. He glanced at the drawing. "Maybe because someone kept a lamp on for me when I couldn't see. Maybe because there's more than one way to be crushed by the same moment." Rosa nodded, face crumpling and smoothing, like paper being folded into something that might fly. "There is," she said. "There is." Rosa said again, as if saying it twice might make it bearable. They sat for a while with mugs cooling in their hands. The little girl colored careful halos around every candle, then added small stick people with their arms upraised beneath the light. When she was done, she slid the page toward Evan without looking at him. as if delivering a message to a guarded border. "What's her name?" he asked. "Lucia," Rosa said. "She's 6. She counts stairs out loud and keeps me honest about stop signs." Lucia counted the crayons as if to prove the point. Evan nodded. He stared at the rim of his cup. "I don't know what to say to Thomas," he said at last. "Everything I think to say feels too big or too small." Rosa folded her fingers, wedding band turning under her thumb. "He says he wants to carry something that belongs to you," she whispered. "A box, a chair, a bag of groceries. Anything. He says his hands won't be clean until they help." Evan watched a tiny thread of steam rise and vanish. Maybe he could come to the chapel," he said, each word chosen like a step on a slick path. No speeches, just a room where names are said and nothing is rushed. There's a lamp that makes it feel like morning might be possible. Rosa's shoulders sagged with relief that looked like fatigue. "I'll ask him," she said. "He's afraid of breaking something just by being near it. But I'll ask." Evan stood, unsure whether to offer a hand or an apology, or both. He settled for neither. "Thank you for letting me in," he said. "Thank you for coming," she replied. "Drive safe." He nodded to Lucia. "Those candles are perfect." "They're strong," Lucia said, very seriously. "They don't fall over in the wind." Driving home, he kept one hand on the wheel and one on the small cross in his pocket, as if holding it might teach his fingers a new grammar. He did not pray long sentences. He breathed. "Jesus, hold me together." The words fit in the space between traffic lights. The next evening, he arrived at the hospital early. He vacuumed the entry, where leaves had made a habit of gathering. He set the shallow bowl of sand on the wooden stand and lined candles along its edge like soldiers resting after a hard march. Theo came in with his hood down and a bag of donuts as a truce with the day. "Got the good kind," Theo said. "The messy ones." "Perfect," Evan said. "We can baptize the floor in sugar." Miriam appeared with a stack of folded papers, the simple program that said who would read names and when they would sing. "Brothers and sisters," she murmured to them as if the room could hear. "Thank you for your hands." People trickled in. The older man with the stone in the river voice. The nurse, hair up, scrubs wrinkled. Ms. Alvarez, because she had started coming on Tuesdays even though no one told her she should. Evan stood by the door and tried not to glance over his shoulder every 30 seconds. At 5 past the hour, Rosa slipped into the back row with Lucia. At 8 past, the door opened again, and a man stood in the threshold like someone who had stepped into the wrong movie. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, 30-something. His hands were clean in the way hands are cleaned when someone has been washing them too often. His eyes found Rosa, and then Evan. He took one step, then another, and sat in the last row. Aisle seat, escape route intact. Miriam welcomed them the same way she always did. "We will read names slowly," she said. "We will not hurry grief or hope. If you need breath, take it. If you need tears, let them do their work." John, chapter 14, verse 27. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you," she began. The names rose. Mothers, uncles, children, friends. When she reached Caleb, Evan stood and lit a thin candle. He felt the heat lift against his knuckles, clean and small and stubborn. When he turned, his eyes snared on the aisle seat. Thomas looked down, then up, then down again. After the final name flickered into flame and the room sat inside a soft chorus of light, Miriam spoke once more. There is no prize for speed, she said. There is the mercy of presence. Matthew chapter 5, verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. The last note of a hymn found the room. When the service ended, people drifted in small constellations. Evan stood by the stand and waited without knowing what he waited for. He did not have a strategy. He had a pocket cross and a sentence that had carried him, and perhaps that would have to be enough. Thomas approached like a person testing thin ice. Up close, Evan saw the tremor in his jaw. Rosa hovered a few steps away with Lucia, not interfering, not abandoning. "I'm Thomas," he said, voice rough. The word died. He tried again. "I'm sorry." The second sentence arrived whole, unadorned, heavy enough to bow his shoulders. "I am so sorry." Evan's chest tightened as if a belt had been cinched. For a second, a film ran. The rainy street, the brake lights too late, the phone call, the room. He closed his hand around the little cross until the edges pressed back. He did not feel magnanimous. He felt like a man learning to stand after a wound. "I don't know what to do with those words," he said honestly, "but I hear them." Tomas nodded once, grateful for even that small landing. "I don't know what to do with my hands," he said, helpless. "I fix cabinets. I change tires. I make things square and safe. I can't make this." He stopped, ran a palm over his eyes. "I pray, and it feels like the prayer bounces." 100 answers scattered in Evan's head and left the floor bare. He reached for the only thing that had not snapped under weight. "I say this a lot," he said, voice low so it would not startle the moment. "Jesus, hold me together." Thomas breathed like someone who had been underwater too long. "Can I borrow it?" he asked. "It's not mine," Evan said. "But yes." Miriam, who had learned how to be present without breaking privacy, stepped closer only when they turned slightly toward her. "Would you like me to pray with you?" she asked, open-handed. Thomas nodded once, the kind of nod that looked like surrender rather than agreement. They stood in an awkward triangle beside the small sea of candles. Miriam did not make them hold hands. She did not close her eyes as if prayer required darkness. "Jesus," she said, simple as setting a plate. "We are poor in spirit. We're tired. We don't have speeches. We have names. We have a wound and a lamp. Help." She paused, as if listening. Help Evan breathe. Help Thomas breathe. Help them carry what cannot be fixed, and yet needs not crush them. Matthew chapter 5, verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Teach us mercy in our bones. For a moment, nothing grand happened. Then something small did. The air felt less tight. Or perhaps they noticed the air again. Evan opened his eyes and found Thomas staring at the candlelight as if it might speak. "I can help with chairs," Tomas said, almost apologetic. "If you need me to." "Chairs are holy around here," Miriam said. "They hold the weight we bring." After most had gone, Tomas stacked metal and Evan rolled the vacuum, and Lucia, appointed by herself, became keeper of crumbs. Rosa wiped the shallow bowl of sand with a paper towel as if polishing a sacrament. No one said forgive. No one said atonement. They said, "Where does this go?" And "Thank you," and "Here, I'll get that end." And something inside the room's geometry shifted by degrees. At the door, Thomas stopped. "There's a thing I wanted to bring," he said, fumbling for his wallet. He pulled out a folded index card, a smudge at the corner where a thumb had worried it for days. He held it out. "I wrote down everything he was wearing from the report so I could..." I don't know. Pray what I could remember. I didn't want him to be just a man. He had a blue jacket, black sneakers, a hat with a fish on it. I say those things out loud so he is not a blur. Evan took the card and saw his brother cataloged with care. Blue jacket, black sneakers, hat with a fish, yes, from that camping trip where the bragging fish had been the size of a rumor. His throat closed around a thank you. He nodded instead. He was real, he said. I know, Thomas whispered. I wish I had known him alive. When they left, the night was clear, the storm having wrung itself out. Evan sat in his car and looked at the index card and the small cross in his own empty hands. The world did not look better. It looked truer. He drove to his apartment and took the letter to Dad from his pocket. He laid it on the table and stared until the words blurred and sharpened, blurred and sharpened. He thought of Caleb wanting to try again. He thought of doors swollen by weather and shoulders leaning hard. He picked up his phone and dialed. It rang long enough to become a kind of meter. His father's voice came across the line older than it had been. Rougher. Dad, Evan said, and already his chest ached. I found a letter from Caleb. Silence. Then a sound like a man sitting down. I'd like to read it to you, Evan said. His hands shook, but his voice held. If you want. I want, his father managed. Evan read. He did not add. He did not edit. He let the sentences cross the space between two houses and an old hurt. He heard his father cry in a way he had not heard since he was a boy, when a hammer had caught a thumb and curses had been swallowed for the sake of little ears. I'm sorry, his father said, for being a wall when I should have been a door. Evan closed his eyes. The old anger rattled its chains. The new grief sat beside it without fear. He reached again for the prayer that fit in narrow places. Jesus, hold me together, he thought, and then said out loud, Dad, do you want to come to the chapel next week? They read names. They don't rush. His father's breath hitched. I don't deserve it, he said. Neither do I, Evan said. They let me in anyway. He could almost hear the nod through the line. Okay, his father said. Okay. The week unfolded like paper, creased, deliberate. Evan kept the lamp on. Theo texted him a song that did not fix anything but kept him company. Mrs. Alvarez left a small snake plant at his door with a note. Mother-in-law's tongue. Don't overwater. It likes stubborn people. He laughed, surprised by joy, and put the plant on the windowsill where the light was kinder in the morning. On Friday, Rosa texted, Thomas wants to know if he can come early to help set up. Evan typed yes, and then deleted it and typed yes again, because sometimes agreeing needs practice. They arrived before the sun went down. They unfolded chairs without ceremony. They lined them up straighter than usual. Thomas carried the heaviest ones like pennants. Miriam redirected him toward the small tasks that teach gentleness, straightening programs, filling the little bottle that kept the lamp wick soft, replacing the short matches with a fresh box. Mercy pays attention, she said, not as a lesson, as a fact. When the circle formed and the names rose, Evan saw his father slip in, hat in hand, eyes red but present. He sat 2 rows back and held the program like a man learning to read. He mouthed the word Caleb when it was said. Afterward, he stood in the aisle long enough for Evan to find him. They did not hug like movies. They shook hands like men who were building a bridge. Then, awkwardly, not knowing where to put their hands after, they hugged anyway. Son, his father said, the word heavier than it used to be. Thank you. Evan nodded against his shoulder. The lamp hummed. Names glowed. He did not feel finished. He felt held. Outside, Lucia danced on the steps, counting each one under her breath as if the number itself were a blessing. Rosa laughed through tears. Theo waved from the curb and pretended not to wipe his eyes. Thomas stood a little apart, not as far as he would have last week. Evan looked up at the night and, without embarrassment, prayed the only way he knew how. Jesus, hold us together. He did not expect a sign. He expected breath. He received it. He received, too, a hard-won peace that did not deny the ache, and a new strength in his hands that felt like service. He turned back toward the door and reached for the keys to the chapel. He knew where they were now. He knew what they opened. He knew how to keep the lamp on. Spring leaned in by inches. The tree outside the cafeteria window traded its winter fists for small green hands. The snake plant on Evan's sill learned the light and stood a little taller, dignified in its stubborn way. He kept the lamp on. He learned the sound of the chapel door as it opened for nurses on break, students between exams, grandfathers who needed to remember names out loud. He learned that people cried in different languages, but grief translated itself. One Tuesday, Miriam didn't appear. Evan checked his phone. A text waited like a folded note. Travel delay, flight grounded. Can you open? If it feels right, would you lead? Keep it simple. Read names. Breathe. M. He stared at the little screen and felt his ribs creak. He took the keys out, put them back, took them out again. He trimmed the wick. He lined up the matches. He told the empty room, I am not a preacher. The room, being a room, did not argue. People came anyway. Theo stood with the box of donuts, powdered sugar already on his hoodie. Ms. Alvarez wore a new sweater with a pattern like road maps. Rosa and Lucia slipped into the back row. Thomas came early to carry chairs like a man making peace with his own strength. Evan stepped to the front with the program in his hand and the small cross in his pocket. Hi, he said. The words seemed too small. He cleared his throat. We're here to keep the lamp on. He glanced at the cross on the wall, not for effect, for help. We'll read names slowly. We won't hurry tears or breath. We'll sing if we can. If we can't, we'll listen. He began to read. His voice steadied the way a ladder steadies when someone else holds the bass. When Caleb came, he let the consonants land, not softening them, not smashing them. Theo read Jordan when it came, his voice a rough violin. The candles took their stations in the sand. Halfway through the last page, the lights went out. The lamp flickered, coughed, and died. A collective breath sucked in. Phones glowed like startled fireflies. It's okay, Evan said, because he needed to hear it. We have light. He found the matchbox by touch, struck sulfur in the dark, and relit the chimneyed lamp. The flame shivered and then held. He grinned without planning to. That's better. They finished the names in a dim gold that changed the room's geometry. Faces became reliefs, carved by flame. The hymn sounded different without electricity, closer to the throat of the world. When the notes thinned, Evan swallowed and felt a verse rise the way a memory rises when it's ready. Matthew, chapter 5, verses 14 through 16. He said, the words sounding borrowed and perfectly sized. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. He didn't preach. He placed the verse on the table between them like bread. Let's do something very practical, he added. If you have a phone, turn on the flashlight just for a minute. White circles bloomed. Look around. Find one face. If you can, say their loved one's name to them. Just their name. That's enough. A murmured chorus rolled. Henry, May, Jordan, Caleb, Elena, and the room became a map of small, dignified stars. When the power returned with a hum and a flicker, no one cheered. They blinked, adjusting. Evan let out a breath he hadn't noticed holding. Thomas clapped him on the back with the softest version of strength Evan had ever felt. You kept the lamp on, Thomas said, not as compliment, as observation. Afterward, while they stacked chairs, the nurse and scrubs approached. I heard someone's been saying awful things online, she said quietly. About Caleb. About the accident. Comments under a local article. You don't need to look. I only wanted you to know so you're not ambushed by it. The words struck a deep bruise. For a moment, anger flared like a match he wanted to throw. What do they say? He asked, already knowing he shouldn't. That he shouldn't have been in the street. That these things happen. That maybe he was on his phone. She grimaced. It's noise. Evan felt the old heat climb, the heat that wanted a target. He turned the small cross in his pocket, wood warming under skin. Noise, he repeated. He thought of Thomas's index card, of a blue jacket, black sneakers, a hat with a fish. He thought of Rosa's hands around a mug, Lucia coloring halos that didn't topple in the wind. He surprised himself. Let's not feed it, he said. Let's make dinner for someone instead. He looked around. Ms. Alvarez, you said the new woman on your floor just lost her husband. Will you take lasagna if we make it terrible and too salty? Ms. Alvarez's eyes watered. Terrible lasagna is the finest dish in the world, she declared. They made terrible lasagna on Thursday in the church kitchen with the wrong pan and too much cheese. They laughed for the first time without flinching when the noodles slid apart. Thomas grated. Theo stirred. Rosa supervised without bossing. Lucia counted layers out loud. Miriam, back from her travel, stood in the doorway like someone beholding a miracle that smelled like oregano. Brothers and sisters, she said, tender and teasing. This is the parable of the casserole. Is that in a gospel? Theo asked. It is now, she said. John, chapter 21, verse 12. Come and have breakfast. Close enough. She touched Evan's shoulder. You did well Tuesday, she added, eyes kind. You placed the verse like bread. He shrugged, suddenly shy. The power went out, he said, as if apologizing for the world. Sometimes God turns off the ceiling so we remember the candle, she replied. On Saturday, Evan and his father met at Caleb's apartment to finish what grief and lists had begun. They boxed books and donation shirts. They found the guitar under the bed, dust furred along its edges. His father lifted it like a relic and sat on the arm of the couch. He tuned by habit more than ear. His fingers, scarred by decades of work, found a simple progression. The first chord wobbled, then settled. Evans sat on the floor and leaned against the coffee table, eyes on the ceiling, hearing something he hadn't heard since childhood. His father, without pretense, making sound. I don't have the words, his father said after a while, not looking up. Me either, Evans said. I was hard on him, his father confessed. Hard on you. I thought hardness made men. Turns out it makes walls. Evan nodded, throat thick. He could have listed faults. He could have kept ledger. Instead, he reached for the phrase that had held under weight. Jesus, hold us together, he said. It wasn't an explanation. It was a request big enough for both. They drove the last boxes to the thrift store and dropped them like offerings. Back at the chapel that night, Evan watched his father stand when Caleb was said and light a candle with hands that had hammered, carried, scolded, built, and now, somehow, blessed. After the service, a woman hovered by the door, small and windblown, clutching a manila envelope as if it might flee. She stepped up to Miriam and then to Evan. "I'm Claire," she said. "I write for the small paper. I've been covering these Tuesday gatherings, quietly. I haven't published anything because I didn't want to turn your names into content. But what you're doing, it's saving people. If I write, it will be about lamps and chairs and lasagna. It will be about how grief makes neighbors. May I?" Miriam looked at Evan. Evan looked at the candles. He thought of noise and light. "If you write," he said, "don't make us heroic. Make it plain. Make it look like something anyone could do." "It is," Claire said, a smile like a stitched seam. "That's the point." She came back a week later with a draft. It read like clean water. The headline was simple: "A room where names are not rushed." The article did not quote online comments. It quoted Lucia, who said, "Our candles are strong." It quoted Theo, who said, "It helps when somebody else says his name." It quoted Miriam, "We keep the lamp on." When the piece ran, the chapel filled with new faces. Some wide-eyed, some wary, some brittle as glass. They came with envelopes, with phone photos, with scraps of handwriting, with recipes in lieu of words. No one asked for speeches. They asked for breath. They found it. One night, as spring leaned harder into becoming, Evan stood outside after closing, keys in hand, Thomas beside him. The sky was the deep blue that comes just before all the stars declare themselves. "I keep thinking," Thomas said, looking up, "that forgiveness and permission are different. I don't want to ask you for permission to be okay. I want to do whatever is the next right thing." Evan considered, feeling the weight and the wonder of not in control and not alone. He thought of the index card. He thought of chairs. He thought of light when the power went out. "Maybe the next right thing is small," he said. "Maybe it's fixing Ms. Alvarez's cabinet and making lasagna that's a crime in 3 states and reading names without hurrying." He glanced at Thomas. "Maybe it's letting mercy be heavier than blame." Thomas nodded, the kind of nod that starts to unclench a life. "Maybe it is." They stood quiet long enough to hear crickets begin their first rehearsal of the season. Evan slid the keys back into his pocket and felt the small cross press against his palm like an answer that was also a call. "Same time tomorrow?" Thomas asked. "Same time," Evan said. He turned toward the dark hallway that led to the lamp and flicked on the small light by habit. He knew how to keep it burning now. He knew, too, that the light it cast was not his to own. It was something given, held, shared, like breath, like bread, like a name said slowly so it would not be dropped. Summer arrived the way mercy sometimes does, quietly, like a hand easing a door. Heat slurred the edges of afternoons. The hospital lawn turned the color of patience. Evan and Thomas fixed Ms. Alvarez's cabinet on a Saturday with the window open and a box fan complaining in the corner. Lucia sat at the table and drew boats with candles for sails, while Rosa held the screws like a surgical nurse. "Square," Thomas said, tightening the last hinge until the door met the frame with a satisfying click. He stepped back and waited for the cabinet to confess any secrets. None appeared. He exhaled. Ms. Alvarez applauded like a crowd of one. "You have performed a miracle," she declared. My sugar will no longer escape into the abyss. They drank lemonade that tasted like a plan. When Evan stood to leave, Ms. Alvarez pressed a recipe card into his hand. No more terrible lasagna, she said. This one will do you proud. On Tuesday, a laminated notice appeared on the chapel bulletin board. Open flame restrictions due to fire code. Battery candles only in hospital spaces, effective immediately. Someone had added a frowny face, and then crossed it out as if sorrow should be tidy. Evan stared at the notice as if it had personally betrayed him. It's a candle, he muttered. It knows how to behave. Miriam read the sign, then the room, then Evan's jaw. It's still a lamp, she said. Just a different kind. He bristled. It won't be the same. It won't, she agreed gently. But the same is not the promise. John chapter 1, verse 5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The light is not the wax. They went to the little church supply shop 2 neighborhoods over and bought a plain box of battery candles with switches that made a small, hopeful click. They lined the shallow bowl of sand with them anyway, out of habit. Miriam refused to let the ritual go malnourished. We'll still read slow, she said. We'll still breathe. We'll still say names like vows. That night, the chapel filled before the hour. People paused at the sign, frowned with their whole faces, then took a candle and turned the tiny switch with fingers that had done harder things. The room glowed different and the same. Evan felt something loosen, a thread taken off a tight spool. He began to read. When Caleb came, he pressed the switch and watched the plastic flame begin its steady blink. It did not gutter. It did not scorch his knuckles. It did not smell like anything at all. Somehow, the small, stubborn blink looked like a pulse. After, a young woman with a lanyard, student ID, scuffed at the corners, hovered by the wooden stand. I'm Mira, she said, voice thin as a reed. I come from my aunt. I thought the real candles were, you know. But my aunt, she always said light is light. She looked down, embarrassed at having said a complete thought to a stranger. Anyway, thank you. Thank you, Evan said, meaning it more than he expected. The following week, the telephone at the chapel desk rang during the slow hour between visitors. Evan answered without thinking. A voice, hurried and careful. Is this the place with the names? My mother is in room 7B. She's close. She keeps asking for someone to read something. Could someone come? Evan looked at the empty chair where Miriam would be in an hour. He looked at the lamp. He looked at his hands. I can come, he heard himself say. Room 7B smelled like antiseptic and the sweet, thin air of machines measuring moments. The woman in the bed was small, like something carefully folded. Her daughter stood at the rail, brave until someone touched her sleeve. I don't know what she means by read, the daughter whispered. Maybe the poem my father liked. Maybe anything. She's always loved church, she added, apologetic. Evan stepped to the bedside and did the one thing he knew to do. He said the name. Maria, he said softly. My name is Evan. I keep the lamp on down the hall. Do you want me to read? Maria's eyes fluttered. She did not answer, but her hand shifted like a bird turning in sleep. He did not reach for eloquence. He reached for bread. John, chapter 14, verse 27, he said. The words quiet as a blanket being pulled over weariness. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. He added another a moment later, as if laying stones for a small path. Luke, chapter 23, verse 43. Truly, I say to you, Today, you will be with me in paradise." The daughter's shoulders dropped a fraction. Maria's hand fell still in a way that looked like landing. He stayed until the nurse closed the curtain. He did not explain anything to himself on the walk back to the chapel. He did not decide he was a preacher. He decided he could sit. On a humid Sunday, Evan's father showed up at the park with 2 fishing poles that had not tasted water in years. They sat on the bank like men waiting for a story to remember them. "I don't know what I'm doing," Evan admitted, threading a worm like a clumsy tailor. "Neither do I," his father said cheerfully, as if confusion were a hobby. "But your brother would like it that we're bad at it together." They cast lines and tangled them and laughed when a dragonfly declared a line its personal runway. The water took the afternoon and made it plausible. When the bobber dipped once and nothing came of it, they cheered anyway. At dusk, his father cleared his throat the way a man does before saying something with too many sharp corners. "I read your friend's article," he said, "about the room where names aren't rushed. I was ashamed I didn't make a room like that in our house when you were boys." Evan tugged at the line, found nothing attached, felt oddly blessed by the emptiness. "We have it now," he said. His father nodded. "We do." The chapel turned into a place where practical good piled up like donated coats. Someone started a meal train. Someone else organized rides for late-night visitors. Thomas built a narrow shelf by the door to hold programs so they wouldn't slide off the stand. Theo played a 2-chord song on a borrowed guitar and called it lamp music. Ms. Alvarez became the unofficial greeter, issuing tissues and stern hugs to those who refused them. Not everything was tidy. Grief sometimes arrived drunk and loud. Once a man stormed out when the name he brought was read too slowly for his pain. Another time, a woman whispered to Evan that she could not forgive God and asked if the lamp could be turned off for 1 minute in protest. He said yes. They stood in the dark together, and he learned the shape of an honest silence. A letter came for Evan with no return address, just his name and chapel written in a hand that leaned forward as if in a hurry. Inside, the index card Thomas had given him, the clothes list, copied carefully, and beneath it, a new line in different ink. He was beloved. No signature. He kept it with the small cross and the recipe for non-terrible lasagna. One afternoon, as the sun walked across the floor and made the lamp's glass glow like a honeycomb, Lucia marched in, holding a shoebox with holes punched in the lid. "What have you got there?" Evan asked, wary of surprises with breath. "Hope," Lucia said, pleased with herself. She set the box on the stand and removed the lid. Inside, a handful of battery tea lights blinked diligently. She had drawn faces on them in marker, some smiling, some serious, and written names on the sides in tiny block letters. "So if somebody takes one home, it's still got their person on it," she explained. "You can keep a candle even when you go." Evan felt something inside him break in the right way. "That's perfect," he said. They made a rule. When you came for the first time, you could take a face light home. People tucked them into pockets, into purses, into glove compartments. Photos appeared on phones later. Lights blinking on kitchen tables, on bookshelves, on dashboards during long, honest drives. Miriam watched this quiet proliferation with the look of a farmer at harvest. "John, chapter 8, verse 12, she said one night, voice soft. "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." She did not press it. She let it fall where it would grow. On the evening that marked 1 year since the accident, Evan did not plan a speech. He printed the program on thicker paper and ironed his shirt because grief deserves clean lines. He placed the photo of Caleb with the rumor-sized fish on the stand and smoothed the edge where it had begun to curl. The chapel filled beyond the fire marshal's favorite number. People stood along the back wall without complaint. Rosa and Thomas came early and stacked chairs again when more were needed. Theo tuned the borrowed guitar to itself and then gave up, grinning. Evan's father sat near the aisle, hat removed, hands open on his knees. Miriam looked at Evan as the clock moved toward the hour. He nodded. He stepped to the stand. He did not dress his voice in anything it had not worn all year. "We are here," he said, "to say names without hurry. We are here to be held together. Thank you for bringing your people." He touched the laminated notice on the board with 2 fingers in passing, like a relic, and smiled. "We'll use the little lights tonight, and if the power goes out, we'll remember how to see anyway." He began to read. When Caleb came, the room answered softly. "Present." It surprised him. It steadied him. When the list finished, he looked up and found himself speaking words that had become, without his planning, a way through. Matthew chapter 5, verse 4, he said, "Bartzal, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." We have been comforted by casseroles and chairs and songs with 2 chords and lamps that don't burn fingers. We have been comforted by each other. We have been comforted by Jesus. He paused, breath and silence making space. "If you're new, there are face lights in the box," he added, nodding to Lucia's shoebox, now decorated with stickers and tape and love. "Take one home. Write a name. Blink in your kitchen at 2 a.m. It counts." After, they spilled onto the steps like a congregation of fireflies, battery lights blinking in palms, voices low, laughter rare and real. Thomas stood nearby, the distance between him and the group shorter than it had been, shoulders less like armor. Evan's father shook Miriam's hand, and then, awkward again, hugged her. Theo handed his guitar to a teenager whose hand said he was not ready and said, "Play it anyway." Evan stepped aside for a moment and looked up. The first star went on, then the second, as if someone somewhere were flipping small, patient switches. He closed his eyes and said the prayer that had begun as a survival rope and become a bridge. "Jesus, hold us together." He did not ask if it had worked. He walked back to the door, reached for the keys, and kept the lamp on. 2 weeks after the anniversary night, an envelope waited under the chapel door, slid there by a hand that didn't want to be seen. Evan bent and picked it up. The return address was a law firm he didn't know. Inside, a letter as polite as a wall, a request for deposition regarding the accident. Details, timelines, any statements he'd made, any interactions with Thomas. Insurance had found new gears to grind. The date was circled. The words were clean and heavy. He sat in the front row with the letter in his lap and felt the room tilt. The lamp hummed like a patient friend. He texted Miriam, then Thomas. His thumbs found simple sentences. "Got a deposition letter. You too?" Thomas replied in less than a minute. "Yes, I'm scared. Miriam, I'm here at noon." At noon, Miriam arrived with a thermos that always knew how to be the right temperature. She read the letter and did not frown the way he expected. "There are things we owe the truth," she said, "and the truth can walk with mercy. But it still can be scary to speak out loud." She tapped the paper with a finger that had baptized many lists. "We'll prepare. We'll remember who we are." He laughed without humor. "Who am I? I sweep floors and keep batteries stocked." She poured coffee into the thermos cap. "You keep the lamp on," she said. "That's not small." They met with a hospital liaison who explained a maze of questions with a locator's pen and sympathy. They practiced answers that were exact without embroidery. What did you see? What time did you receive the call? Had Caleb used the crosswalk? Each sentence felt like lifting a weight that used to be a person. Evan's throat grew raw. He stood in the chapel afterward, hands on the back of a chair like a man steadying himself on a dock. Thomas joined him in the quiet, shoulders broad, eyes tired. I hate the sound of my name on legal paper, Thomas said softly. It makes me feel like a caution sign. I hate the way my brother becomes a timestamp, Evan said. They didn't plan it, but together they walked to the intersection as evening cooled the asphalt. Flowers no longer gathered there daily, but a few hardy ribbons flapped at the base of the streetlight. Traffic moved with the bored precision of habit. They stood side by side, two men looking at a place that had cut their lives into before and after. Thomas swallowed. I keep replaying it, he said. The rain, the break, the angle. If I had left 4 minutes later, if I had asked him to wait for a different topping, Evan said. They almost smiled at the absurdity, then didn't. He took a breath that scraped. We're about to sit in a room where every decision is a lever. I don't want to hate you there. I don't want you to, Thomas said. He looked at the crosswalk light, at the little white walking figure, at the red hand that followed. If they ask whether I prayed, I'll tell them I did, and it didn't change the physics. He exhaled. If they ask whether I'm sorry, I'll tell them more than words. Evan nodded. If they ask whether I blame you, he said, testing the sentence in his mouth, I'll say, I don't know what I'll say. He flinched at his own honesty. I don't want to lie. I don't want to crucify you with my grief either. From somewhere behind them, a voice called, Hey. They turned. Claire stood with a notepad tucked under her arm and no camera, hair swept up as if the wind had tried to keep it. I'm off the clock, she said quickly. I came because I knew the letters went out this week. I'm not writing about this. If you need someone to sit on the hard chairs outside while they ask the hard questions, I can sit. They looked at each other, then at her, then at the street. Thank you, Evan said. It felt like a bridge plank settling into place. The deposition room was colder than its size demanded. A pitcher of water sweated on a side table like it knew how to be human. The court reporter's hands were a blur of faithful motion. The lawyers were almost kind, which somehow made the question sharper. Evan answered with the plainest words he had. He did not try to sound wise. He tried to sound true. When asked about Thomas, he did not issue a verdict. He said, We both lost something at that intersection. I don't know the name for what he lost, but I see it. When it was Thomas's turn, his voice landed like wood put down carefully. He did not excuse. He did not whittle the moment into something less. He said, I should have, because that's what his bones believed. And he said, I didn't see, because that's also what they knew. At one point, the questions came to the prayer his wife had mentioned. He cleared his throat. A friend gave me one, he said. It goes, Jesus, hold me together. Sometimes I say us instead of me. No one wrote that down as evidence. The court reporter did anyway. Outside, on those hard hallway chairs, Claire sat with Rosa and Evan's father. They did not make conversation stand upright. They let it nap. Rosa handed out mints like sacraments. Evan emerged looking like a man who had swum a long way and found a sandbar. Thomas came out like a man who had told the truth to a stranger and hadn't died of it. They stood there in a crooked row until breathing felt less like work. Evan's father cleared his throat. I wanted to be angry, he told Thomas. "I know how to be that. It's a tool I've used too much. But anger makes walls, and I'm tired of building the wrong thing." He stuck out his hand. "If you want to fix something else that is actually broken, my back porch sags." Thomas stared at the offered hand, as if it were a species he respected from afar. Then he took it. "I know good lumber," he said, voice catching. "I'll bring some." They did. On a Saturday that smelled like cut grass and sawdust, they tore out the rotten boards and replaced them plank by honest plank. Evan measured. Thomas cut. His father set nails with the grace of an old rhythm rediscovered. They didn't talk about the deposition. They talked about the angle of the sun, about whether this board or that board had the straighter grain, about Caleb's fascination with knots and how he once named one dragon eye and refused to sand it flat. Near the end of the day, they sat on the new steps with lemonade that had learned to sweat like the pitcher. A bird practiced a song in the elm. The porch didn't sag. It held. Evan looked at his father's hands. "I think he would have liked this," he said. "He would have told us we were doing it wrong, and then he would have eaten all the cookies," his father said, a smile pulling his mouth into a shape it remembered. "Probably," Evan said, and let the picture sit. At the chapel that week, a new sign appeared beside the battery candles. "Take one if you need to remember you are carried." Lucia had added a doodle of a stick figure with very long arms labeled Jesus. Theo had complained about the theology and then left it because the arms made him laugh. A man arrived late, out of breath, hat in hand. He stood in the doorway like Jonah at the mouth of a fish. When Evan walked over, he spoke without greetings. "My daughter," he said. "I haven't talked to her in 9 years. I read the article. It said there's a place where you can say names." He swallowed. "If I say Hannah here, does it count?" "It counts," Evan said, "even if I was the one who broke it. Especially then." He said it. He said Hannah, like a password to a house he had built and abandoned. He did not collapse. He did not ascend. He stood, and a battery candle blinked, and someone behind him in the room whispered, "Present." And his face moved like weather from storm to clearing, without pretending the rain hadn't fallen. After the names, Miriam looked like peace wearing shoes. She didn't preach. She told a small story about 2 men and a porch that now held. She looked at Evan and Thomas and his father and lifted one hand like a benediction, not to bless a moment as finished, but to bless it as begun. "Brothers and sisters," she said, and the room answered by being there. This is how we learn to walk on water. One honest step at a time, while we look at Jesus. Matthew chapter 14, verse 29. "Come." Evan walked to the door, reached for the keys, and kept the lamp on. He did not know what letters might come next, what rooms he might be asked to enter with shoes he felt unworthy to wear. He knew only that names would be said, that breath would be shared, that bread, in whatever form it arrived, would be placed on the table between them like a promise. On his way home, he drove past the river where dragonflies rehearsed summer. He parked and walked down to the bank with the small cross in his pocket and the index card folded beside it like a thin companion. He said Caleb's name into the water, to the sky, to the God who had wept at another grave and called a friend out. "Jesus," he said, because that was how the prayer began and how it continued. "Hold us together." The water moved. The sky held. The prayer did its slow, unglamorous work. And the man who kept the lamp on went home in the ordinary holiness of a day that had not been earned and could still be used. Evan found the note on the chapel stand 3 days later, folded small as if it wanted to be held. "Thank you for reading to my mother. She went quiet with a smile. We put a face light by her photo. Elena. Taped to the back was a grocery receipt with Maria written across it in careful ink, because sometimes paper was what people had when they needed to make something permanent. He tucked it into the small box with the other keeps. Tomas's index card, Lucia's early drawing, the recipe that had rescued their lasagna from infamy. That afternoon, Elena appeared in person with a tin of pan dulce and eyes that had learned a new softness. Evan poured coffee and let her tell the story again. The hand squeeze, the breath easing, the way the ceiling light had made a halo on a woman's thinning hair. "I don't know if that verse did anything," she said, as if apologizing for asking peace to be more than words. Evan shook his head. "It did what it always does," he said. "It stayed." On Sunday, as the late service thinned, Miriam found him wiping candle dust from the sand bowl as if polishing memory. "We're short on voices tonight," she said. "Would you read one verse before names?" She said it like offering a chair, not like drafting a soldier. "I'm not a—" he started, then stopped using the word he'd worn out. "You'll place it like bread," she said. "Easy." When the little room settled, he stood without dressing his voice. He held no pulpit and preached nothing. He simply borrowed the words that had met him in a hallway, and a kitchen floor, and a cold deposition. "Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28, he said, as if laying a plank. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He let the sentence sit until its weight found the room's beams. Then he read names. When Caleb came, someone in the back whispered the same soft amen they always did. Present. Work gathered around them like lumber. A woman whose husband had died in a roofing fall needed a railing. Thomas measured and Evan drilled. A grandfather who kept tripping on a loose threshold brought the board to the chapel and waited while 3 men in borrowed aprons argued kindly about the right screws. A sign-up sheet appeared on the bulletin board with the title Theo scribbled at the top. Lamp and ladder, small fixes for heavy days. Ms. Alvarez stood beside it with a clipboard and a pen like a wand. "Mercy has a tape measure," she declared, enforcing order with merriment. Not everything said yes. One Tuesday, a man arrived furious, grief cracking like ice under thaw. He stood in the aisle and demanded to know why God had not done for him what he'd done for Lazarus. His voice spooked the room. 2 people stood, ready to leave. Miriam did not match volume with volume. She stepped nearer as if approaching a skittish horse. "John, chapter 11, verse 35, she said, and the room could have said it with her by now. "Jesus wept." She did not explain the rest. She let the weeping stand as a person. The man's shoulders dropped a fraction. He stayed long enough to light a battery flame with hands that shook. A week later, the hospital announced shorter chapel hours. A memo in corporate gray said that due to staffing and safety, the room would close at 9. People read it as one reads the weather. Resistant, resigned. They looked at Miriam. She looked at the sky. "We'll borrow the park," she said. "The spirit is not allergic to outdoors." That Tuesday, they met under the bandstand roof that had hosted piccolo recitals and PTA announcements. Battery lights blinked in mason jars. Children chased each other between ankles, chased back by gentle shushing. Claire stood off to one side with her notebook closed, because sometimes a story's truest shape required no ink at all. Fireflies arrived late and made the sky agree with the jars. "John, chapter 1, verse 5, Miriam said, smiling at their small constellation. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." She glanced toward the closed hospital doors and shrugged with good humor. "We'll keep shining over here." Evan watched people bring their names across grass instead of tile. He watched the lamp become a people, not a fixture. He watched Thomas show a teenager how to change the dead battery in a tea light and make of it a parable without words. He breathed like a man who remembered how. A few days after the first park night, Evan asked Miriam to meet him by the river at dawn. Mist lay over the water like a secret shared slowly. His father came with a thermos and 2 towels, looking out of place and right at home. Thomas and Rosa stood a ways back with Lucia, who counted dragonflies with whispered reverence. Theo came because Theo came to everything now. Ms. Alvarez came because she had decided from the first casserole that this was her family, whether they admitted it or not. "I think I've been following him," Evan said to Miriam when they were close enough to keep the morning's humility. "Quietly, clumsily, I want to be marked by it." Miriam smiled the way some people cry, without permission, because truth had pressed through. "Luke, chapter 15, verse 5, she said softly. "And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing." She looked at the water. "We can do this. No speeches. Only vows." He stepped into the river, jeans heavy, heart light. The water reached knees, then ribs. It was colder than he'd expected, honest as a hand on a fevered brow. He took a breath like someone about to go under and then didn't fear it. "Do you trust Jesus?" Miriam asked, simple as a nail. "I do," he said, and found the words fit in his mouth the way the prayer had fit in the dark. "Do you intend to follow him?" she asked. "With what I have," he said. "With these hands, with this room, with our names." She nodded. She lowered him. The river closed over a man who had learned to say present for the person he loved and now learned to say it for himself. The river gave him back. Water in his ears, water in his lashes, water in his smile. He stood and wiped his face with both hands. His father made a sound that was not a word and then laughed to make room for it. They wrapped him in a towel that smelled like someone's dryer sheets. Rosa hugged him with a sister's warmth. Thomas stood there awkwardly, then pulled him into an embrace that felt like a beam set square. Lucia presented him a face light with Evan written in bubble letters, as if he were now a name someone might need to say. They walked up the bank and someone, Theo of course, held out a donut like a sacrament of sugar. They ate and shivered and let morning make promises it was happy to keep. The lamp and ladder list grew. They repaired a screen door that sang at the wrong times. They tightened a handrail. They replaced a flickering kitchen bulb for an elderly man who wept at the sudden competence of his own ceiling. "Small mercies," Miriam said, as if tallying offerings no one would see but God. There were setbacks. A storm peeled shingles off the little church shop. They paused repairs for a week to tarp and nail and pray for a deductible to be kind. Theo relapsed into silence for a while and stood in the back with his hood up like a lighthouse with its light off. He came forward again on a Tuesday when names sounded like his own breath and said, "I still miss him." The room answered, "Present." Not to a name this time, but to a confession. One evening, Evan unlocked the chapel for the shortened hours and found a small box on the stand. Inside were 6 battery lights and a card that said, "From a stranger who needed this and hasn't been brave enough to come in yet." Below, a line in cramped script. "Thank you for not rushing." He switched one on and left it by the cross for the stranger, wherever he was, whenever brave enough arrived. Claire's second article never ran. She left it in a drawer and brought cookies instead. "Sometimes the best story is the one the town tells itself," she said, leaning against the doorframe. watching people take jars to their cars like captured stars. As summer began to lose its edge and the river slowed into its late-season bass note, Evan drove to the cemetery with his father and Thomas. They stood at the stone with Caleb's name and the dates that made sentences too short. They brought the old photo again. The fish, the grin, the rumor, and a face light with dragon eye in Lucia's handwriting. "I didn't bring flowers," Thomas said, stumbling honest. "I brought a screwdriver in case the memorial bench wobbles." "It wobbles," Evan said, grateful for a problem they could fix. They tightened the bolts. They said the name. They sat on the bench and watched evening settle on the grass like a shawl. When they rose to go, Evan put the small cross back in his pocket, feeling the wood against his fingers. Familiar as breath. He did not feel finished. He felt found. He did not feel strong. He felt held. On the way out, a new family stood by a fresh mound, faces open and raw. Evan paused, unsure, then stepped close enough to be heard without being a crowd. "There's a room," he said softly, nodding toward the hospital. "We don't rush names there. If you want, you can bring yours." They looked at him, the way people look at water when they've walked a long way. The mother nodded. "What do we need to bring?" she asked. "Only the name," he said. "We'll help with the rest." They came 2 nights later, stunned and shy. The room made space. The lamp hummed. A battery flame blinked. Miriam read from memory, not to fill silence, but to make it hospitable. John, chapter 14, verse 27. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you." Evan stood by the door with the keys in his hand and the shoebox of face lights at his feet, ready to write another name in careful letters. He had learned the feel of the hinge, the swing of the door, the weight of the light. He had learned how to keep it burning. "Jesus," he prayed. Not eloquent, not long, exactly enough. Hold us together. Autumn edged the leaves with fire and then asked them politely to fall. The hospital announced renovations that would close the chapel for 3 months. A laminated sign gave dates and apologies. People stood reading it like a prophecy they hadn't asked for. Miriam traced the border with a finger, thoughtful. "We've borrowed the bandstand," she said, "but some nights will freeze our bones. We could scatter, or," she glanced at Evan, "we could find a small room that says yes." Claire knew a landlord whose heart had outgrown his profit margin. A week later, they stood in front of a narrow storefront between a laundromat and a bakery that made the morning smell like forgiveness. The windows were dusty, the floor slanted. The sign above the door read "Vacancy" in a font that looked unsure of itself. Rosa pressed a hand to the glass. "I can see chairs in there," she said. "Chairs are holy," Tomas replied. The landlord met them with a ring of keys and a shrug. "Short lease," he said. "Cheap. Fix what you can. Tell me what you can't." He looked at the faces that had learned one another by candlelight. "My wife used to light a candle every night for her mother. The good kind, with wax and danger." He smiled at his shoes. "I'll get out of your way." They swept decades out of corners. They painted walls the color of warm bread. Thomas and Evan built a simple stand for the face lights, a shelf for programs, a rail by the door where coats could hang like companions. Lucia taped a sign in the window with careful letters. "The lamp room. Names not rushed." Theo argued about the definite article, and then admitted it made the name feel like a door you could find in the dark. The first night, heaters hummed like tired bees. Battery lights blinked in jars on windowsills. Ms. Alvarez declared the broom a liturgical instrument. Miriam stood with a paper in her hand and did not read it. She looked at them like a mother looks at children she remembers from before they were born. "Brothers and sisters," she said simply. John, chapter 1, verse 5. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Welcome." They read names. People brought faces on matte paper and glossy, on printer paper and old Polaroids with corners softened by thumbs. A man came in still wearing a mechanic's shirt with his name stitched crooked. He stayed in the back until Hannah was said, then moved forward like gravity had changed its mind. After, a woman with a scarf wrapped twice around her head approached Evan. "You read at the hospital," she said. "For Maria. I recognized your voice." She handed him a folded napkin from the bakery next door. Inside, a sugar cookie shaped like a star. "I don't have much," she said, "but I can keep sugar in the room." "Bread and sugar," Evan said. "Seems like a gospel." Some nights were thin. Rain scolding the windows, 6 people singing off-key on purpose. Some nights were crowded, shoulders touching, jars blinking, breath shared. Not everything was peace. Once a jar cracked when the room shifted and an elbow knocked it hard. Once a man pacing in the alley outside shouted that names were ghosts that should be left alone. They left the door open anyway. On a Tuesday that remembered summer and tried to pretend, Theo didn't come. Evan noticed the gap the way one notices a missing tooth with the tongue. He texted twice, then drove to the apartment where Theo lived with a roommate who labeled their milk protectively. No answer. He drove to the river out of instinct he didn't know he had. He found Theo on the footbridge that had learned the names of too many shoes. Theo's hoodie was up. His hands were on the rails. His breath made small flags in the colder air. He didn't turn when Evan stepped beside him. Close enough to count the boards, but not to pin him. "I don't have a lecture," Evan said. "I brought a phone with a flashlight and a terrible donut." Theo huffed something between a laugh and a cough. "I don't want to jump," he said, surprising them both with the truth. "I just wanted the water to be louder than my head." "It's a good river for that," Evan said. He leaned his elbows next to Theo's, a mirror without insistence. "I can be quiet with you, or I can say a verse, or I can say nothing and hand you half a donut." Theo pulled his hood back and looked like a boy and a man at once. "Say the thing," he said, softer than the dark. "The breath thing." Evan nodded. "In for 4, he said, counting with a finger on the rail. "Hold for 4, out for 6. They did it 3 times. The water kept moving, indifferent and merciful. When the cold found their wrists, they walked back toward the street. Theo took the donut like a sacrament of ridiculous grace. "Do you think he hears me when I talk to him?" he asked, not meeting Evan's eyes. "I think Jesus hears," Evan said. "And I think Jordan hears the way the saints hear. Better than we think." He stopped, suddenly unsure of his own tongue. "I say present sometimes when I'm alone. It helps." Theo smiled without showing teeth. "Present," he repeated, trying the word on. "Okay." He came to the lamp room the next night and played his 2-chord song. It wasn't any better. It was more honest. People swayed because swaying didn't require skill, only a body willing to admit rhythm. Snow practiced in flurries and then committed. The bandstand went quiet under a white hat. The hospital chapel, freshly painted, sent a new memo. Reopening, limited hours, no outside groups. Miriam read it and hung it beside the door that stuck in winter sign. 2 rooms now, she said. Good. We can spill. Around that time, a letter arrived from the insurance company with words like settlement and disbursement. Evan sat at his kitchen table with the envelope like a stone. Money isn't mercy and never will be, but it can be lumber, rent, heat. He called Thomas. "It feels like admitting price," he said. "It feels like a chance to build," Thomas answered. "If you want, we can do something that looks like gratitude." They asked the circle. No fanfare, no thermometer poster on the wall, no campaign. Just a quiet list of what the lamp room needed that week. Rent, jars, batteries, 3 space heaters that wouldn't argue with the breaker, a sturdier stand. People gave what they could. Time, tools, cookies, cash. Evan used part of the money with his father's blessing and Thomas's insistence to cover a year's lease. He signed papers at a desk that had seen other hopes and wrote, "The lamp room" on the line for tenant with hands that shook like prayer. Miriam brought out a battered box the next night. Inside, small smooth stones. "From the river," she said. "For pockets. For hands that need something to hold while names are said." Lucia drew tiny crosses on a few, stars on others, simply because some nights needed both. A woman named June started leaving index cards with practical scripts for hard calls. How to ask for time off without apologizing for grief. How to tell a school you need the counselor. How to order pizza when your brain is fog. People took them like maps. Some came back with their own versions, penciled notes in margins. Mercy learned bullet points. One Wednesday, Evan found his mother sitting in the back row before anyone else. She held her purse like a shield and a tissue like a truce flag. He hadn't seen her in weeks. Phone calls were good, but thin soup. "I don't know how to be here," she said when he sat beside her. "I don't know how to be anywhere he isn't." Her eyes went to the stand, to the jars. "Do you still say the names?" "We do," Evan said. "We will." She nodded, a small mechanical motion that might one day become a yes. "When you were boys," she said, a story entering like a hesitant guest, "we had a power outage. Your father was out. You cried because your nightlight died. I put a candle in the hallway and you fell asleep on the rug like a pilgrim." She laughed at herself. "I forgot that until now." "We have battery ones," Evan said gently. She sniffed, half amused, half offended at the era. "We will make do." When Caleb came, she stood for the first time and pressed the switch on a face light with fingers that had braided small heads and packed lunches and pointed at clocks. She whispered, "Present," and sat down with her chin up like a soldier who's learned a new rank. Late winter brought a cold that bit harder than other years. The heater nearest the door died with a sigh, and they warmed their hands on paper cups and good intentions. Thomas walked in with a new unit on his shoulder the next night. "Anonymous donor," he said, winking badly. Evan didn't correct him. A boy no taller than the counter came in with his grandfather and hovered at the shoebox. "Can I make one?" he asked, eyeing Lucia's markers. "Yes," Lucia said gravely, sliding the box toward him as if deputizing a new officer. "You have to write clear so the candle can read." He stuck his tongue out in concentration and wrote, "Pop." He drew a tiny fishing pole on the side. Evan felt the world press and then lift. Spring came back like a promise kept. The hospital reopened the chapel, and the lamp room kept breathing too. A lung on the other side of the block. Some nights they met in both and texted each other photos of jars blinking and shoes stacked neatly by doors. Mercy multiplied without asking permission. On a Saturday, soaked with sun, they held a workday with a grill dragged out to the alley, boards stacked like punctuation, laughter arguing with hammers. Evan's father supervised with a straw hat and more opinions than nails. Rosa organized children into a crumb patrol that rivaled any municipal service. In the middle of the bustle, a man Evan didn't know stood in the doorway, hands jammed deep in his jacket. His face had the starved look of someone who'd been rationing breath. He took in the jars, the slanted floor, the stand, the faces. He cleared his throat. "I drove 2 hours," he said. "I read about a place where you can say a name and not be told to get over it. Is that here?" "It is," Evan said. The man nodded, as if the earth had tilted back a degree toward livable. "Her name is Zoe," he said. "She liked to count. She would have liked your jars." Luthia stood, serious as a judge. "We count," she said. "We count stairs and candles, and sometimes we count breaths." Miriam wiped sawdust off her hands and stepped into the doorway light like someone arriving on cue. "Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28, she said softly. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." She did not move toward him. She made space for him to move. He did. That night, they said Zoe and Pop and Jordan and Caleb and a dozen others, each one a step, a plank, a candle, a breath. When the last face light blinked into its small duty and the last voice lowered into after-song hush, Evan stood at the door, with keys heavy and right in his palm. He felt the familiar shape of the small cross against his skin, the edges now oiled by a year's worth of need. He looked at the room, the slanted floor, the jars, the shelf Thomas had sanded smooth, the script cards June had straightened, the sign Lucia had retaped twice, the chair Ms. Alvarez claimed like a pew, Theo's guitar propped in the corner like a friend who didn't want to go home yet, his mother's coat on the hook with a tissue peeking like a white flag. He did not feel finished. He felt faithful. He locked up, pocketed the keys, and stepped into night that had decided to be kind. He said the prayer that had made a road where there hadn't been one. "Jesus, hold us together." The door clicked. The lamp glowed on its timer. The jars kept their quiet watch, and the man who kept the lamp on walked toward tomorrow with enough light for the next step. November brought gray mornings that smelled like wet wool. The bakery's ovens fogged the lamp room windows by 7, writing kindness in steam. One Monday, Miriam did not show. She texted a single line at dawn. "Doctor says rest. Heart's fine, rhythm's fussy. Keep the lamp on." Evan stood with the message open until it felt like a benediction and an assignment in one. He unlocked early and warmed the room the way she did. Lights, jars, kettle. He called Rosa, who called Ms. Alvarez, who called everyone without making it sound like alarm. By evening, the chairs were set straighter than straight, as if order could be a kind of comfort. Evan stood at the front with empty hands and the small cross in his pocket. "I'm not Miriam," he said, the obvious becoming honest. "But I've watched her carry names like bread. We'll do that. We'll place a verse on the table and then we'll eat." He let silence put its elbows on the stand. "Luke, chapter 12, verse 32, he said, voice quiet enough to draw people closer. "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." He watched the words land. He watched shoulders drop as if the sentence had put itself under the weight. Then he read, "Zoe, Hannah, Pop, Jordan, Caleb, Maria." Names rose, candles blinked, breath did its steady work. After, the man who had driven 2 hours lingered. "I'm Ezra," he said, as if admitting his own existence in the room cost something. "Zoe's dad. I think I need to say names where I live. We don't have a chapel or a bandstand. We have a laundromat with a back room and a manager who says Tuesdays are dead." Evan pictured the back room. Detergent smell, metal table, bulletin board with curled flyers. He nodded. Light is light, he said. Jars travel well. 2 weeks later, Ezra texted a photo of a folding table under a humming soda machine. 4 jars blinked between detergent bottles. A hand-lettered sign on the peeling wall read, "Names not rushed." He added, 3 people came. 1 brought cookies. We kept the lamp on. Miriam drifted back like a tide, slower at first, then herself again. She stood in the doorway and watched Evan read one night and shook her head, smiling. "You've been carrying your own voice around in your pocket this whole time," she said. "You decided to take it out." He shrugged. "It sounds like yours wearing my shoes," he said. "But they fit." The lamp room's winter became a catalog of small obediences. June's script cards multiplied. How to tell a friend you can't be their only raft. How to sit in the parking lot before you go in. How to leave a casserole without making it a conversation. Thomas and Evan replaced the wobbly table with one they built and sanded on a Saturday. They wrote "mercy" on the underside in pencil because it cheered them to think the word would support elbows for years. One night, the door opened, and a man about Evan's age stepped in with the defensive posture of somebody who expects to be judged at any second. He scanned the jars, the chairs, the crooked shelf. He was clean in the way of someone newly sober. Tremor everywhere, but hands. "I used to work with your brother," he said to Evan before the room caught up. "Caleb, I wasn't kind to him. I thought jokes were jokes. But he stopped. His jaw worked. He brought me soup when I got the flu. Stayed 2 hours. I told him to get lost. He left the soup anyway. I ate all of it." He swallowed. "I came to say his name and to tell you that part. He was better to me than I was to him." Evan braced for the punch of anger that used to come when strangers owned a piece of his brother. It didn't land like a fist. It landed like a letter finally delivered. He nodded, the movement small and full. "Thank you," he said, and meant it like oxygen. "Say it with us." "Caleb," the man said when the time came, and the room answered, "Present." And something unknotted in a place Evan had not been able to reach with his own hands. January iced the sidewalks and taught the door to argue. People stomped snow from their boots and apologized to the floor. The heaters kept up, mostly. One Thursday, the power really did go, not just in the lamp room, but across 3 blocks. The bakery went dark mid-loaf. The laundromat paused mid-cycle. The street shrugged into a deeper quiet. Evan stood in the doorway, looking at a neighborhood that suddenly had the same amount of light as their jars. He lifted a box of battery candles and set them along the window ledge. One by one, small circles of steady blink declared the room. People who had never come stepped in because the light had drawn a line on the sidewalk like an invitation they didn't have to read. Theo arrived with his guitar and shook snow from his hood onto the floor. Alvarez had already decided to forgive. "If I play 2 chords loud enough, does it count as heat?" he asked. "It counts as welcome," Evan said. They read names wrapped in coats and knit hats. They passed out jars like hand warmers. Lucia invented soup ministry on the spot by ladling reheated church basement chili into paper cups. Miriam stood by the door and whispered, "Fear not," to anyone whose face said fear anyway. Rosa passed out napkins and said "here" to every version of need. At some point in the candle and code evening, Evan's mother took the place at the stand and read a verse with both hands on the paper as if it might otherwise fly. John, chapter 10, verses 27 and 28, she said carefully. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish." She exhaled in a way that sounded like a piece clicking into a puzzle. Afterward, she allowed Theo to teach her the 2 chords. She played them badly and smiled like a woman finally making noise that matched her heart. Winter cracked. The first warm rain smelled like a promise and a mailbox. Ezra wrote again. "Laundromat manager wants to start earlier. She says people linger even when the cycles finish." He sent another photo. 7 jars, then 10. A kid had drawn faces on them the way Lucia had. One had braces on its drawn teeth. Someone had written Tyler in careful black. When Miriam caught the flu in late February, Evan ran Tuesday alone again. He did not feel brave. He felt loved into courageous. After names, the man who had once shouted about Lazarus waited. "I keep wanting a miracle like that," he said, voice flat with honesty. "But I keep getting this. You all. Soup. Chairs. A verse that won't leave the room. Maybe that's the miracle I get." "Maybe it's the one we were promised," Evan said. "Bread for the day, not answers for a lifetime." They stood in companionable defeat that wasn't defeat at all. On a Sunday in early March, Theo pulled Evan aside. He looked more boy than man when nervous. "I want what you did," he said, chin angling toward the river without naming it. "Not because water fixes me. Because I want to be marked. I want to say present about myself to someone who knows what that means." They met at the same bend, under a sky the color of forgiveness. Miriam, recovered and fierce in a scarf, stood in the river like a pillar. Rosa wrapped towels. Thomas stood by like a wall that had learned to be a gate. Ms. Alvarez cried immediately, and then blamed the wind. Lucia counted dragonflies that were not there yet, and decided to count clouds instead. Miriam looked at Theo, the way one looks at a person stepping out of a familiar room into a larger one. "John, chapter 8, verse 12, she said softly. "I am the light of the world. Do you trust him?" Theo nodded, breath fogging and faith stubborn. "I do," he said. "Even when I don't feel it, I want to want him." "That counts," Miriam said, smiling, and lowered him and raised him, and the river did what it does. Receive, release, keep moving. They ate donuts because that's what they did when heaven felt near and fingers were cold. Theo stood shaking like a plucked string and laughed without shame. "Present," he said, to no one and to Jesus and to his own chest. "Present." Spring returned in green sheets. The hospital chapel's hours expanded. The lamp room kept pace like a second heartbeat. Ezra's laundromat circle multiplied face lights and borrowed verses. A woman from 2 towns over visited and whispered that she might start a lamp in the back of her hair salon, because grief talks more easily when hair is being washed. Evan told her jars travel well, and Mercy has a comb. On a Wednesday that looked exactly like an ordinary day, Evan walked to the river with a sandwich and sat on the bench he and Thomas had tightened. He took the small cross out of his pocket and placed it on the plank beside him. He took Caleb's photo, the rumor, fish, the grin, from his wallet and set it on the other side. He bit the sandwich and chewed like someone who no longer apologizes to hunger. He told his brother about the porch and the jars, about Ezra and Zoe, about Theo and the 2 chords, about Mom playing badly and Dad wearing a straw hat, about Rosa's recipe that killed terrible lasagna forever, about Lucia's shoebox empire. "I wish you'd see this," he said quietly. "I wish I could be mad about pineapple with you again." He smiled at the water. "I think you'd like Thomas. He's learning to let his strength be gentle. A breeze lifted the photo and set it back like a careful hand. Evan put the cross on the corner to keep it still. He breathed the prayer he knew by heart and by need. Jesus, hold us together. A dragonfly drew a line in the air like a signature. The river went on, keeping its promises. Evan finished his sandwich, stood, put the photo back in his wallet, the cross back in his pocket, and walked toward the lamp room with enough light for the next thing. By late March, rain wrote long sentences on the lamp room windows, and the bakery's kindness fogged the glass from the other side. Evan arrived one morning to find something else written there. A jagged line of black marker across the lower pane. Get over it. He stood with the keys in his hand and watched the words sit where hope usually did. Thomas came up behind him with a toolbox. He took in the message, then Evan's jaw. "We can scrape," he said. Evan nodded. "We will." He unlocked the door. The little bell made its small, stubborn sound. They filled a bucket, found razors and rags. The first strip came off easier than expected, the black lifting in curled chips like something that had never been meant to stay. Miss Alvarez arrived with a spray bottle and a mutter that could have moved mountains. "No one tells my grief to get anywhere," she declared, spritzing with righteous enthusiasm. By noon, the glass shone. Claire set a box of sidewalk chalk on the stoop without announcing it. Lucia picked it up like a baton and began writing names on the concrete in careful colors. Jordan, Maria, Caleb, Zoe, Hannah, Pop. Passersby paused. A delivery driver squatted and added Aunt Lee in blue, then wiped his eye with the back of his wrist and said he had allergies. When people gathered that night, Evan stood at the stand with hands that wanted to either shake or hold. He chose to hold. "Someone asked us to get over it," he said, not harsh. "We won't. We'll get through it. Together." He looked down at the paper, then up again. John, chapter 16, verse 33. "In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world." He let the sentence sit until the room's beams felt steadier. Then they read names, slow as always. After, they took chalk outside and kept writing until the sidewalk looked like a sky where stars had learned to pronounce themselves. Ezra texted a photo from his town the next day. A laundromat walkway with names chalked crooked between gum stains. "We got get over it too," he wrote. "We got through it." Spring advanced in green paragraphs. The hospital chapel reopened to late hours on Fridays. The lamp room kept weeknights. Ezra's jars blinked under the soda machine. The hair salon's lamp at the sink held Saturdays when customers pretended they were only there for trims. Mercy found places to sit. One afternoon, Evan sat with June at the small table by the window, cutting cardstock for more script cards. Outside, a group of teenagers on scooters stopped at the chalk sky and took photos, giggling, then went quiet, reading. One knelt and printed Uncle Min with a seriousness that looked new on his face. June blew a paper scrap off her finger. "Grief keeps finding its literacy," she said. "We just keep supplying paper." The next week, a letter came addressed to the lamp room in a hand that leaned like a person hurrying. Inside, a note. "I don't come in. I walk past. I don't say the name. I hear you say it anyway. Thank you. A." There was no return address. Evan tucked it in the box with the index card, the shoebox drawings, the recipe that had redeemed lasagna, the napkin star cookie wrapper. The small archive of ordinary holiness thickened. A Thursday brought a call that bent time. The hospital needed someone in the ER. A family had arrived after a sudden ugly thing with sirens and a television. The chaplain on duty was across town. Could someone come to say words? Evan said yes without thinking and drove with both hands on the wheel like a prayer. The ER was a bright storm. He found them in a corner, two parents holding the handles of their grief like a stretcher. He didn't know the details. He didn't need them to know what to do. He sat. He borrowed his friend's words. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, he said, not as an answer, as a cup. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. The father nodded like a man who had decided to keep breathing 1 minute longer. The mother said a name. Evan said it back. Present. When he returned to the lamp room that night, Miriam was arranging jars on the windowsill. She looked at his face and didn't ask questions. Mark, chapter 6, verse 50, she said quietly. The verse meeting him before he knew he needed it. Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid. He leaned on the stand and let the words hold a corner of his weight. A few days later, he drove 2 hours to Ezra's town for a Tuesday under fluorescent lights and the click of change machines. 14 people came. They set the jars on a folding table between vending snacks and a bulletin board where lost pets shared space with guitar lessons. Ezra read Zoe with a voice that had reconciled itself to being both broken and true. An older woman with a grocery tote read Earl and then asked if anyone needed rides on Wednesdays. 3 hands went up. She wrote names on her palm. A man who cleaned at night wiped the table edge twice, then stood still, then whispered Nate when it was time. When they finished, the soda machine breathed carbonation like a benediction that fizzed. Ezra hugged Evan outside in the parking lot under a moon that seemed to have been waiting for the appointment. Thank you, he said, for jars that travel well. Back at the lamp room, summer rehearsed in earnest. A little girl brought a face light labeled Baby, with a heart drawn where a name could not go yet. A grandmother brought a recipe for soup that would see you through 6 conversations. Thomas and Evan reinforced the coat rail because grief had weight even when worn lightly. On a Friday evening that smelled like rain and bread, Evan's father arrived with his guitar. 2 chords, he warned Theo, and 1 more if the spirit helps. They played badly and together, which turned out to be a better music than good alone. Evan's mother sat in the second row, eyes open, lips moving in a quiet line. Present, present, present. At the end, she stood and read a verse without apology at her throat. John, chapter 14, verse 27, she said, certain as a turn in a familiar road. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. The room let peace be what it was. Given. Then came a night when things broke in a new way. The landlord knocked on the door before the hour with a letter he hated. Codes, inspections, fees. The lamp room needed a permit it didn't have and money it hadn't budgeted. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands like a man offering bad weather. I'll eat what I can, he said, but some of it's the city. Evan read the letter twice and felt the old fear press against his ribs. The one that said good things were fragile and the world didn't care about jars. He looked at the faces already gathering. Rosa with a casserole. Lucia with fresh markers. Ms. Alvarez with a clipboard. Theo with a guitar he pretended not to love. June with new cards. His father with a hat perched wrong. Miriam with eyes like a lighthouse. And the fear had to make room for something else. They read names. They stacked chairs. They made a list. They set a jar on the stand with an index card under it. Permits and heat and a rent. Only if you can. Some put money in. Some put time. Some put 2 screws and the promise of a Saturday. Ezra texted, "Laundry circle, taking a collection. Soda machine said it's in. The hair salon sent tips for jars. A stranger slid an envelope under the door that said, "For light." By the end of the week, the permit had a fee, and the fee had an answer. When the inspector came, he stood in the doorway with a tablet and a face that had learned how to say no politely. He looked at the jars, the stand, the slanted floor. He cleared his throat. "My mother's name was Nell," he said. "She said names slow. Do you have one of those little lights? I can't stay. But I could take one to her photo." Evan handed him a face light drawn with a tiny comb on one side and a tiny donut on the other, because Lucia had decided all names should have a companion. "We'll say Nell tonight," he said. The inspector nodded, blinked fast, and then did his job without bending and without breaking them. The permit printed. The lamp room remained. On a Wednesday soft with dust in the window light, Evan sorted a new stack of letters in the back. He found one addressed in his father's careful block. Odd, because his father had never mailed him anything in town. Inside, a photo of the renovated porch with "Dragon Eye" penciled in tiny letters on the underside of one board. And a note. "I wrote it there so we'd step on it every day and not forget. Proud of you, Dad." He sat with the photo in his hands and let himself feel both pride and the ache that accompanied it. He stood, slid the note into the box, and checked the batteries in the lamps, because sometimes faith looked exactly like that. That night, as names rose and jars blinked, a boy with paint on his sneakers slipped in late and hovered like a hesitation. After the last amen of breath, he approached the stand with a folded sheet of paper and a half-guilty look. "I'm the one who wrote on your window," he blurted. "The get over it thing. My friends dared me. My sister died last year. I was mad at everybody. I'm sorry." Evan felt anger not arrive. Compassion did, more honest and harder. He nodded. "Thank you for coming back," he said. "What's her name?" "Kayla," the boy said, eyes wet. Evan placed a verse like bread. "Luke, chapter 12, verse 32, he said softly. "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." He handed the boy a face light and a marker. "Write it. We'll say it next." The boy wrote with his tongue between his teeth, careful as a promise. He placed the light on the stand. When Kayla rose, the room answered present, and the boy's shoulders moved as if the word had made a space inside him that grief could live in without knocking over the furniture. Later, Evan locked the door and felt the small cross in his pocket and the familiar weight of keys. He glanced at the sidewalk where names in chalk had blurred and brightened, faded and returned, where rain had tried its hand at erasing and failed. He breathed the prayer that had become his day's punctuation. Sometimes a comma, sometimes a period, sometimes a dash that kept a sentence going. "Jesus, hold us together," he said, and turned toward tomorrow with enough light for the next step. April arrived with a bright wind that made the chalk names look newly written. The lamp room settled into a rhythm, a heartbeat with chairs. Evan learned the sound of a person taking a breath before saying a name. He learned the way silence made room for courage. He kept the keys in his pocket, the small cross warm to the touch. On a Tuesday slicked by evening rain, his phone rang at 2 a.m. The number was unfamiliar. He answered with the instinct he'd grown. "This is Evan." "It's me," Ms. Alvarez said, voice small, smoke-fogged. "There's a fire in my building. I'm okay. My sweater isn't." A cough. Sirens stitched the background. "I'm coming," he said, already pulling on boots. The street outside her apartment was smeared with red and blue. Steam rose from the roof like a hard prayer. Ms. Alvarez stood on the sidewalk with a neighbor's blanket around her shoulders and a grocery bag clutched like a passport. Ash freckled her cheeks. When she saw Evan, her chin lifted stubbornly. Then the brave face crumpled, and she let him wrap his arms around her like a scarf. "The cat is at my sister's," she said, almost apologetic. "I saved my plant." She held up a pot with a scorched snake plant that looked indignant and unkillable. "We have a room," Evan said, "and a rail for coats." He called Rosa, who called Thomas, who called everyone the way news used to travel. Mouth to ear, hand to hand. By dawn, the lamp room smelled like coffee and smoke and bread. Blankets appeared. A row of cots lined the slanted floor like a chorus waiting to sing. Lucia printed a new sign with serious care. "Emergency sleepover. Names not rushed, either." Theo set his 2-chord guitar in the corner and hung a string of paper stars between the windows, because grief slept better under constellations. Ms. Alvarez sat on the edge of a cot with the snake plant like a lapdog. She was shivering in the way people do when the body decides to release the delayed truth. Evan knelt. "Matthew, chapter 25, verse 35, he said softly, placing the words like a blanket. "I was a stranger, and you welcomed me." She sniffed, then smiled into the edge of the blanket. "I am not a stranger," she said. "I am the concierge." "Your family," he corrected. By noon, the inspector who had asked for a face light stopped by with a clipboard and sleeves rolled. "Temporary occupancy?" he said, already filling a form. "I can make that true." He looked at Ms. Alvarez, and then at the row of cots, and then at the jars, blinking like loyal eyes. "I'll check back at dinner time," he added, which sounded like, "I will eat with you in the kingdom," if you knew how to hear it. They fed whoever the fire had displaced. June's cards morphed overnight. What to say to the insurance person when you're still coughing? How to accept a cot without apologizing? Where to put your shoes so you can find them at 2 a.m.? Ezra drove in with a trunk full of blankets from the laundromat's Lost and Found and laughed that he was finally returning laundry to people he'd never met. That evening, when the lamps hummed and the room filled with people who had not planned to be together, Miriam stood not at the front, but among them. "John, chapter 10, verse 14, she said, in a voice that made the verse sound like it had taken off its shoes. "I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me." No sermon. Only breath, jars, soup, cots, coats. Evan worked until his hands shook from tiredness and gratitude. He walked around the block at midnight to cool his head. When he came back in, Thomas was standing by the door with a toolbox and eyes gone soft with usefulness. "The back hinge squeaks like fear," Thomas murmured. "I'm going to make it quiet." Evan watched him oil the hinge the way a person might bless a forehead. "You do holy work," he said. Thomas shrugged one shoulder, embarrassed. "I'm learning to let strength be kind," he said, as if quoting someone wiser. "Caleb would have liked you," Evan said, before he decided whether it would hurt to say it. Thomas's jaw trembled around gratitude. "I wish he'd known me this way," he said. The emergency stretched into a week and then into a plan. The lamp room would host night watch anytime the city had a fire or a flood or a sudden cold snap. They wrote it on the bulletin board with fat letters and a phone number. The inspector taped a city notice below it that said, "Approved." The word felt like a psalm. One afternoon, while the cots were stacked and the kettle breathed and the bakery's kindness fogged the glass again, a woman stepped in with a backpack and the careful posture of someone who had been told to take up less space. She hovered, then held out a plastic bag with a Tupperware dish inside. I'm Mara, she said. I can't stay. I made soup. It's my grandmother's. It helps with things soup can't reach. She looked at the jars and the shoebox of face lights and the sign Lucia had retaped twice. Could you say Ben tonight? Evan nodded. We will, he said. Will you write it? He handed her a marker. She printed Ben with a hand that wanted to be steady. She turned the little switch with a tiny click and set the light in the shoebox. That evening, when Ben rose and the room answered present, Mara stood in the doorway, half shadow, half sanctuary. She listened until the last jar blinked, then left the Tupperware on the table like a sacrament and slipped away. Spring lifted into summer without apology. The porch at Evan's father's place did not sag. It hosted. There were barbecues where grief sat at the table and no one hurried it. There were Saturdays where Lamp and Ladder fixed a window latch and installed a grab bar and tuned a guitar that would never quite agree, but kept trying. There were Tuesdays where rain made the jars look like harbor lights, and Fridays where Ezra texted, 8 jars tonight. Kid wrote Mom and then asked if that was allowed. Answered yes. Not everything was glossy. Theo lost patience with himself and disappeared for 4 days. When he came back, he stood in the doorway like a man who'd been to a desert. I didn't do something terrible, he blurted. I just thought too hard about nothing. Evan didn't applaud. He handed him a jar. They read Jordan, and the room answered, present. And Theo found his 2 chords again like a bicycle that had forgiven him. In July, a call came from the prison chaplain, 2 counties over. I heard about your jars, he said. We've got a grief group. Steel doesn't help the ache. Would you bring light? Evan looked at Miriam. She nodded like a stone that had decided to roll where it was sent. They packed a plastic tote with face lights and a stack of June's cards and a shoebox labeled names. The room inside the prison was fluorescent and fixed. The chairs were bolted to the floor like truths. Men in khaki sat with their arms crossed over chests that had forgotten how to be unguarded. Evan did not bring a sermon. He brought the only script he trusted. We say names without hurry, he said. We don't fix. We don't rush. If you want to write your person's name, we'll say it. Hands moved. Markers squeaked. A man with a teardrop tattoo wrote Mama, and then sat very still. Another wrote Dre, and didn't look up. A third wrote nothing, and then pushed the marker toward Evan as if the weight were too much. Can you write me? He asked, ashamed and defiant. I'm still breathing, but I ain't here. Evan wrote it. When me rose, the room said present, and some of the cross-armed chests loosened as if a door somewhere had found its hinge. Evan placed a verse the way he'd learned to. Short, true, enough. Matthew chapter 5, verse 4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. No extra edges, no cleverness. A cup set on a table. Men nodded like they remembered water. On the drive back, Miriam looked out the window at fields that moved like a congregation. Light is light, she said, as if answering a question no one had asked out loud. It travels. August was loud. The bakery's mixer, children's sandals slap on the sidewalk, the city's heat humming like a stubborn machine. The lamp room's air conditioner coughed and died. Ezra arrived with a used unit in the back of his car that owed him nothing and would now serve the kingdom, and he and Thomas muscled it into the window while Ms. Alvarez issued instructions that were mostly encouragements disguised as orders. That night, Evan's mother brought a bowl of peaches the color of gratitude. She ate 2, then stood and read Caleb, with the steady voice of someone who had learned the rhythm of yes. Evan felt the word land and turn into a floor. He kept the lamp on and did not try to make the moment larger than it was. He let it be the right size. Present. In September, the hospital chaplain, the one who had first given them those midnight calls, retired. At his small party in a break room with a cake that tried its best, he pulled Evan aside. "When I started, I thought the work was answers," he said, scratching his chin. "Turns out it's chairs and presents, in the name of Jesus in a voice that doesn't hurry." He laughed, eyes wet. "Keep the lamp on." Evan walked back to the lamp room at dusk. He unlocked the door and stood for a minute in the threshold, listening to the hummed prayer of the room, the fridge, the lamps, the soft tick of jars cooling after a day in the window. He thought of the first night in the hospital chapel when a low lamp had offered him a place to put his brother's name. He thought of Miriam's voice saying blessed without trying to sell him anything. He thought of the cross he carried now like a stone smoothed by pockets and prayer. He turned on the kettle. He laid out the jars. He placed the program. He reached for the verse and found it waiting like bread. John, chapter 14, verse 27. He whispered into the empty room, because even empty rooms can learn by heart. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you." The doorbell made its small, stubborn sound. People came. Names rose. The room answered. He kept the lamp on. October thinned the light by supper. The bakery's ovens warmed the windows each morning, and the chalk outside bloomed with new names whenever a drizzle made room. One Thursday, Ezra drove in with a plastic tote of blinking tea lights and a notebook fat with notes from his laundromat circle. Who needed rides, whose shift changed, whose soda machine ate quarters and grief with equal appetite. He set the tote on the lamp room table with a grin that looked like wind at his back. "We're doing this," he said, almost surprised at the truth of it. 4 lamps now. Laundromat, salon, a living room on 3rd that smells like crayons here. A woman named Nina started one at the bus depot on Thursdays. Just a jar and a card table. People stand for their stop and say a name and almost miss their bus in the best way. Miriam listened, with her head tilted like a bird hearing a far-off hymn. "John, chapter 8, verse 12, she said softly. "I am the light of the world." Light travels. She tapped the notebook. So does love when it has a list. They held a small lamp night on a Saturday. No speeches, only coffee and plate after plate of cookies and the plain joy of comparing jars. Nina from the bus depot came with a folding sign that said, "Names not rushed, 5:15 to 6:05 p.m. The salon owner brought a damp towel around her shoulders and laughed. "Names rinse better than dye." June laid out her script cards like playing pieces for a gentle game. Ms. Alvarez presided from her chosen chair, snake plant on the sill, issuing introductions with the authority of a maitre d'. Late in the evening, as the room began to hum toward goodbyes, Thomas stood beside the stand with hands that knew what to do when wood was crooked and hearts were too. He stared at the shoebox of face lights and then at Evan. The question sat between them before it found words. "I think I'm ready," Tomas said, voice low, as if not to startle something shy. "To be marked, not to forget. To belong to the mercy that keeps following me." He swallowed, jaw tight and honest. "Will you—" He didn't finish. He looked toward the door that led out to the river road. Evan nodded, the movement small and full. "We can go at dawn," he said. They gathered at the bend where the river shouldered past stones and learned how to talk around them. Morning put its hand on the surface. The water pretended surprise. Rosa stood with Lucia, who counted breaths and missed curls. Ezra came because jars travel, and so do friends. Evan's father wore the straw hat as if it could bless weather. Miriam tied her scarf and stepped into the water like someone answering a familiar call. Thomas slipped off his boots and rolled his jeans with hands that had learned gentleness under weight. "I brought this," he said to Evan, sheepish, and held out the index card he had carried like penance. The catalog of what Caleb wore on the day the world split, now creased into a softer thing. "I don't know if I'm allowed to put it down. I don't know the rules." Evan took the card and slid it into his own pocket with the olive wood cross. "We'll place it under the bench later," he said. "Some boards carry secrets on purpose." Miriam stood thigh-deep and nodded Thomas forward. "Mark, chapter 8, verse 34, she said, the words plain as lumber. "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." She looked at him, not as a criminal, not as a caution, but as a man. "Do you trust Jesus?" Thomas exhaled a year's worth of held air. "I do," he said, the words finding their shape on his tongue. "I want the kind of strength that heals." "Do you intend to follow him?" Miriam asked. "With my hands," Thomas said. "With the way I carry chairs. With how I say names." She smiled, and the river seemed to agree. She lowered him and raised him, and he rose with water on his lashes and relief in his jaw, not absolved of history, but met by a future big enough to hold it. Rosa cried without hiding it. Lucia declared, "Present," in a whisper that could have been a trumpet. Evan's father made the sound a man makes when something good hurts the right way. On the bank, Evan pressed the small cross into Thomas's wet palm. "For your pocket," he said, repeating the sentence that had once steadied him at a graveside. Thomas closed his fingers around it as if learning a new way to hold a tool. They walked up the slope and sat on the bench the three of them had steadied months ago. Evan took the index card from his pocket and slid it under the board where Dragon Eye hid, pencil faint. The card's edge caught for a moment and then disappeared into the small cathedral of wood and shadow. "Names belong to love now," Evan said, not a proclamation, only a truth spoken out loud to make it less shy. The week after, the lamproom learned another shape of storm. A woman named Dana stumbled in with news that knocked air out of the day. Her brother gone. Suddenly, cruelly. She stood like a person blown forward and said the name once, too loud for the room, as if testing whether vowels could hold. People flinched and then leaned. Evan placed a verse like he always did, not as a lid, as a plate. "Luke, chapter 7, verse 13. He said quietly, the old town rising around them. "When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, 'Do not weep.'" He didn't ask her to stop. He let the sentence promise what Jesus promises. Not a scolding of tears, a nearness inside them. After, Thomas found Dana a chair that didn't wobble and tinkered with the door hinge again, because metal remembers fear and needs reminding. Lucia produced a face light with a doodled anchor on one side, because sometimes mercy needed a metaphor. June slipped Dana a card that read, "How to sleep on the couch without hating yourself for it." By November's end, the chalked sidewalk looked like a long, bright eulogy the rain refused to erase. Nina texted a photo from the bus depot of a city worker crouched to write a name before his break ended. Ezra sent a message in all caps that read, "Soda machine swallowed a prayer and gave it back as exact change." The prison chaplain reported 6 jars blinking in a cinder block room and one man who had asked for 2. One for Mama, one for me. And who now mopped the floor like a liturgy. One night, a stranger waited until the room was nearly empty. He wore a business shirt and a day-old beard, and the look of a man who had managed a crisis until the spreadsheet ran out. He cleared his throat, failed to find a voice, then tried again. "I was the surgeon," he said to Evan, words landing like nails placed slowly. "On the night your brother came in, I thought if I worked harder, faster, smarter." He stopped. "I wanted to tell you I said his name, in the room, twice. I have not stopped hearing it." He put his hand on the stand, the way hands find altars when they forget the prayers. "I read about this place and drove past 3 times. I don't need anything. I needed to say that." Evan's body remembered the old fight that had once risen at the sight of white coats. It did not arrive. What came instead was a kind of tired gratitude that still knew how to stand. "Thank you," he said. He opened the shoebox and held out a light and a marker. "Write it again." The surgeon printed Caleb, square and careful, then Nell, surprised at his own hand. "My grandmother," he said, almost smiling. She read names slow. They placed the lights. They said the names. "Present." On the first snow, the bakery's windows steamed and the lamp room filled with the quiet of boots on mats and people deciding not to hurry. Miriam stood among them like a lamppost. "John, chapter 14, verse 27, she said, "because some bread bears serving nightly. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you." She nodded to Evan. "Read, brother." He did. He read Dana's brother, and Nell, and Zoe, and Jordan, and Kayla, and Maria, and Caleb, and a new name written in block letters by a hand that shook. Dr. Lee? Because even healers need someone to say present for them when the day is finally quiet. He finished, and the room breathed, and the jars blinked, and the door hinge did not squeak. And outside the chalk lay under a clean sheet, ready for tomorrow's declarations. After the last chair found its stack, Evan stood in the doorway with the keys in his hand and the cross warm in his pocket and felt the strange, steady joy of becoming exactly what he hadn't known he was allowed to be. A keeper of lamps, a reader of names, a borrower of bread. He whispered the prayer that had made all of this passable. "Jesus, hold us together." Snow ticked. The lamp hummed. The night agreed. The year turned itself over like a page. December pressed its blue thumbprint on the afternoons, then gave way to a night that came early and stayed. They decided to keep a longest night watch in the lamp room. No speeches, just hot cups, jars blinking like patient constellations. A plate of cookies that seemed to refill itself. Chairs pulled closer. Miriam stood among them, scarf tucked into her coat, voice low enough to let people hear their own breath. "Luke, chapter 2, verses 10 and 11, she said with a smile that did not scold the dark. "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord." She let the words rest where they fell, and then took a chair like everyone else. The surgeon came and sat in the back, collar open, wife beside him. A woman with eyes that had learned to sit with sorrow without interrogating it. Across the room, the inspector slipped in after his shift and tucked a facelight labeled Nell on the sill, then lingered by the coat rail as if listening for his mother's voice on the other side of the door. Ezra texted a photo from the laundromat. 4 jars, 7 hands, a box of detergent with joy on the side. Nina sent one from the bus depot. A row of winter hats bowed slightly as names were said between route numbers. The photos made their way around the room the way bread does around a table. They sang what they could. Theo and Evan's father found the 2 chords and carried the tune like it was heavy and worth it. Lucia passed out paper stars she had cut by the dozen and announced that every star must be given away before you left, so you don't hoard constellations. Ms. Alvarez pretended to enforce it, and then actually did. At midnight, Evan stepped outside with the kettle and watched his breath write brief letters in the cold. He thought of Caleb's grin and the rumor-sized fish, of the index card under the bench, of Thomas rising from river water, jaw unarmed, of Ezra's jars under the soda machine, of June's cards that taught Courage how to dial a number. He thought of the first time he had said his brother's name out loud in a room with a lamp and how he had not died of it. He touched the small cross in his pocket and felt the edges he knew by heart. Winter lifted slowly, like a heavy curtain. Lent unfolded without drama. A long walk of little obediences. Names were said. Chairs were carried. Hinges oiled. Rides given. Soup ladled. On a Thursday, when the sky could not decide if it wanted to rain or brood, Evan's mother showed up with a new habit. She had learned how to be the first to arrive and the last to leave, collecting abandoned mugs with the precision of a liturgy. Once, when she thought no one was watching, she stood by the stand and smoothed the edge of Caleb's photo with a thumb, the way she might have smoothed a cowlick when he was small. Holy Week came wearing its quiet shoes. The hospital chapel kept its own watch. The lamp room kept theirs. On Saturday, they dragged a folding table to the park and set out jars in a row like small tombs, refusing to be final. They didn't try to dress the moment. They just stayed. At dawn on Sunday, they walked to the river. The water remembered. Miriam stood with her toes in the chill and lifted her face to the gray that was learning to turn gold. She did not lift her hands. She lifted a verse. Luke, chapter 24, verses 5 and 6, she said, the words clean as water. Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. A thin cheer, not fireworks, more like a porch light flicking on. The surgeon laughed, surprised by the sound coming out of his own mouth. The inspector said "Nell" under his breath, and then present without embarrassment. Ezra passed thermoses down the line as if serving communion. Theo, still working out what belief felt like in his chest, whispered Jordan to the river and let the syllables blow past his lips like a secret that wanted to be known. Rosa held Lucia's hand. Lucia counted sunrays as if they were something you could keep. Evan stood on the bank with the small cross in his palm and the photo in his wallet and the weight of 100 names inside his ribs. He remembered the chapel's lamp, that first candle's stubborn flame. Miriam's voice saying "blessed" without hurry. The taste of terrible lasagna redeemed by a recipe card. The chalk that would not obey rain. The night the power went and the room remembered it knew how to see. He remembered not being sure he believed, and then deciding to follow anyway, like stepping into cold water and discovering joy as a side effect of obedience. Miriam stepped out of the shallows, jeans dark to the knee, hair wet at the ends like a teenager, unbothered by dignity. She looked at Evan and tipped her head. "Read?" He shook his head instinctively, then felt yes rise. He opened his mouth to the old bread. "John, chapter 20, verse 16, he said, surprising himself. Jesus said to her, "Mary." He let the single name hang there, a call and an answer, a world set back on its hinge. He did not add commentary. He did not need to. Somewhere, a bird misunderstood its cue and sang anyway. They didn't crowd a program into the dawn. They stood and let the light do its honest work. They made their way back to the lamp room with river-slick shoes and a feeling like someone had changed a bulb in the world. Easter afternoon found them in the lamp room with the windows flung and the bakery's kindness in their pockets. People drifted in as if they had been told there would be pie, even though there wasn't. Nina leaned a bus schedule against a jar and promised to poach commuters for the kingdom. Ezra sketched a crude map of his town on a napkin and circled the laundromat and wrote, "Names here," with a little arrow. The prison chaplain sent a text. 2 jars blinked today for men who never thought they'd say present for themselves. He is risen, even here. A boy with paint on his sneakers arrived late and went straight to the shoebox. He pulled out the face light he'd made months ago and replaced the battery with hands steadier now. He set it on the stand. Kayla. Present. Midweek, they took lamp and ladder on the road to a trailer with a soft floor and a woman who startled at kindness. They replaced a board and left a jar. They changed a light bulb and left a script card. How to ask a neighbor for sugar without apologizing for breathing. On the way back, they stopped at the bus depot because Nina's sign had fallen. Evan taped it straighter. Tomas tested the table for wobble. Lucia left 3 paper stars under the schedule just because. The world felt less like a problem than a project. Spring, like mercy, leaned into summer. A nurse brought 3 names from a night shift and stayed to stack chairs. The inspector came without his clipboard and learned the 2 chords badly and didn't care. The surgeon showed up on a Tuesday with a tray of muffins and didn't apologize for baking. June ran out of cardstock and began writing scripts on napkins, claiming napkins made it friendlier. Ms. Alvarez's snake plant sprouted a tall stalk and a weird flower. She called it a miracle and scolded anyone who tried to explain. One Tuesday, a woman in a blue dress that had seen happier days sat in the back and stared at the floor for the whole hour. When people began to drift toward the door, she stood and cleared her throat and read from a crumpled page. "My name is Rena," she said. "I haven't said my husband's name in public since they closed the casket. I forgot how to make my mouth do it. I think I need to try here." She looked at the shoebox like a lifeboat. "Is there a marker?" Evan handed one over without saying a word that would turn the moment into a task. She wrote carefully, printed, then put the cap back on as if closing a wound with her own hands. When they said Aaron, the room answered, "Present." And for a second, she looked like a woman who had found a door in a wall and stepped through it without asking permission. That night, after the last jar blinked itself into its watch and the last chair found its stack, Evan locked the door and stood on the stoop. The chalk names had faded and bloomed and faded again until the sidewalk looked like a watercolor of remembrance. He thought of all the rooms where jars blinked now. Sinks and laundromats and bus depots and cinderblock chapels and living rooms that smelled like crayons and frying onions. He thought of how grief had taught his hands to carry, and how mercy had given his hands something better to carry. He thought of the lamp humming behind him, the kettle on its hook, the shoebox with marker scuffs, the shelf Thomas had sanded until his palms shone, the rail Ms. Alvarez treated like an altar of coats. He touched the small cross, warm from his pocket. He didn't feel finished. He felt faithful. He didn't feel strong. He felt held. Behind him, in the room, a battery flame blinked under Lucia's latest sign. "We don't rush names. We don't rush healing. We don't rush God." He smiled because he knew who had really written it. He stepped into the evening and whispered the prayer that had become his life's punctuation. Comma, period, dash. Jesus, hold us together. The wind moved down the street like a choir taking a breath. Somewhere, a door hinge did not squeak. And when the next person came with a name, there would be light for the next step. By late spring, the city tacked a small brass rectangle beside the lamproom door. It wasn't important to anyone but the ones who passed under it every week. The plaque said only, "A place for names." Evan ran his thumb over the letters on his way in and again on his way out, the way a person checks a pocket. Still there, still true. a new pattern had settled in. Monday mornings belonged to repairs. Lamp and ladder left a trail of tightened screws and steadier steps. Tuesdays held the soft liturgy of jars and breath. Thursdays were Ezra's laundromat nights, the hum of dryers a metronome for grief. Saturdays, the salon sink listened while scissors kept time. In between, the lamp room door made its small sound again and again, a hinge that no longer squeaked. One afternoon, a teenager hovered at the threshold in a backpack too big for his shoulders. He read the plaque 4 times without stepping in. Lucia saw him and didn't wave. She only opened the marker box and pushed it closer to the edge of the table. He came in like someone entering water, slowly. He looked at the jars, the shelf Thomas had sanded to a satin, the shoebox with faces scuffed by care. He kept his hood up until he didn't. "Do you have to be religious?" he asked Evan, defensive as a cat. "You have to be breathing," Evan said, pouring hot water into a mug. "Tea helps. Sugar helps more." The boy hovered over the marker like it might bite. He printed 3 letters and pushed the cap back on as if he'd done surgery. "Mom." The word looked both too small and exactly enough. They said it that night. The room answered present without rehearsal. The boy, Ari, they learned later, sat with his hands in his sleeves and a face that softened by degrees. When the door clicked after, he lingered. "Why do you say present?" he asked. "Because they are," Evan said. "To God, to love, to us." Ari nodded, as if he could not yet believe it but wanted to. He came back the next week with a jar he'd drawn a tiny skateboard on, because names needed companions. News drifted in waves. Ezra's laundromat circle grew to 2 nights and a plug-in kettle. Nina's bus depot lamp moved to a corner by the lost and found, because commuters kept almost missing their routes. The prison chaplain wrote that the men had begun to say present for people still living when they had no one to say it for them, which sounded like a kind of resurrection. The inspector's face light for Nell had moved from his dresser to his truck. He said her name at stoplights. The surgeon baked muffins so often that no one commented when he switched to banana bread. On a Sunday flecked with pollen, Evan carried 2 jars and a small shoebox to the hospital chapel. He stood in the doorway and breathed in the old stillness. The hum he knew. The blue wall. The cross. He could see himself there, 1 year and more ago, hands jammed in a jacket, drowning in a room that had only air. He set the jars on the sill and stood very still, not to perform gratitude, but to feel it. Miriam stepped in behind him and waited until he moved. "John, chapter 20, verse 19, she said quietly, laying a verse like a hand on a fever. "Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, 'Peace be with you.'" He nodded, not because he had an answer, but because the words fit the room again. In June, they took jars to the river, not for baptism, but for memory. Dusk lit the water like a page. They set the battery candles along the bank and watched blink become reflection. Thomas and Rosa stood back to back, hands brushing, both surprised by the rightness of nearness. Theo carried the 2 cords in his pocket and forgot to be nervous. Evan's father brought the straw hat and sat on the bench they had saved from SAG, thumbs pressed to the board where Drag and I slept. Evan's mother sat beside him and whispered present the way she had learned to, a small, sturdy yes. Ari stood at the edge with the hard posture of a survivor and stared at the line of lights as if they might say his mother's name without help. Evan joined him, shoulder to shoulder without pressing. "You can say it," Evan said, not to draw a performance out of him, only to give permission to breath shaped like syllables. Ari said it. The water received it without ceremony. Fireflies made their case for tenderness. "Do you think she hears?" Ari asked, a knife wrapped in a question. "I think Jesus hears," Evan said, the answer tasked with holding what it could. "And I think the ones he holds are more alive than we know." Ari leaned forward, wind in his face, a boy learning to let mercy close the smallest distance. "Present," he said, testing the feel of the word when it belonged to someone he could not see. When the lamps flickered and the night grew certain, Miriam spoke without standing on anything. "Matthew, chapter 5, verse 14, she said, "You are the light of the world." She looked at each jar as if it had done labor. "Take one home if you need to remember." They did. Jars rode home on dashboards and in bicycle baskets. Light traveled. July gilded the sidewalks and made the chalk brighter than it had a right to be. Evan woke one morning with a feeling like a bell rung once and still humming. He brewed coffee, slipped the cross into his pocket, and walked to the lamp room before his keys could get jealous. He opened the door and stood inside the threshold because some thresholds needed noticing. A stack of letters waited on the stand. Most were the now familiar hands of grief. Thanks, names, recipes, money folded inside paper that smelled like a house. One envelope was different, a postmark from a town he knew only from Caleb's stories. He opened it with his thumb. The letter inside was short, the handwriting too tidy for grief and therefore truer. "I worked with your brother at the camp with the crooked bunks," it read. "He taught me to tie knots and how to burn pancakes with conviction. When I heard, I planted a tree at the edge of the field where he told ghost stories. It survived the winter. Thought you might like to know. R." He smiled at the air, because sometimes a room shares joy the way it shares sorrow. He set the letter in the box with the napkins and the recipe card, and the index card, and the A. He stood a minute longer to see if the room would say anything back. It said what it always said. Be faithful. Keep the lamp on. Pour the water. Place the verse. Read the names. Breathe. The seasons turned again, and the lamp room kept choosing yes by inches. Ari began to collect shoes for men leaving prison on Tuesday nights because the chaplain said dignity looked like decent laces. Ezra started bringing a bucket for chalk. Nina made her sign waterproof. June wrote cards for holidays no calendar kept. How to sit across from an empty chair on the birthday. How to answer, "How are you?" when you aren't. How to tell your boss you can't do the Christmas party. The inspector volunteered to be a fire watch for longest night. The surgeon learned to tune the two-chord guitar slightly better. On an ordinary Thursday, a woman Evan had never seen walked in with a camera and the cautious steps of someone who knew how to observe without stealing. "I don't want to take pictures," she said quickly. "I want to learn. My mother says grief made me a journalist. I'm trying to be a neighbor instead." Evan laughed, surprised at how easy it was to say yes. "Take a jar," he said, "or a chair, or a marker. Those are the tools here." She took a chair, then a marker, then never raised the camera. Months later, an article ran without her byline, clean and soft-footed, about rooms where names found breath. No photos. Plenty of soup. The night the bakery changed owners and shut for a remodel, the window stopped fogging the lamproom glass, and the street felt slightly colder for lack of that kindness. They lit the jars a little earlier and bought bread on purpose, and delivered a face light to the new baker with a sign that said, "We are across the wall." The bakery reopened, smelling like different proofing, and people decided the cinnamon rolls were mercy-shaped. One more river morning arrived without trumpets. Ari texted Evan at dawn. "Come." Evan came. The water was the faithful one. It knew what to do with men who were ready to be marked. Ari stood on the bank with a towel around his shoulders, and a look like a door inching open. Miriam asked him the questions in a voice that had weathered both storms and picnics. "Do you trust Jesus?" Ari nodded once, hard. "I want to," he said, honest enough to be holy. "That counts," she said, and lowered him and raised him. And the river did its ancient trick of teaching breath how to return. On the bank, Evan wrapped him in the towel and grinned, the grin returning on his face like a guest he hoped had a spare key. "Present," he said, and Ari said it back. A joke and a vow and a prayer. They climbed the slope and found the bench waiting. Evan slid his hand under the board, fingers brushing wood and the edge of an old index card. He left it where it belonged. He traced the pencil dragon eye with his nail, barely visible, still there. He put the cross back in his pocket and the moment back in his ribs. At dusk that same day, the lamp room gathered as if called by an instinct older than calendars. They did what they always did, because what they always did had proved itself. Jars, breath, names, bread-like verses placed without fuss. Miriam stood again among them. She didn't lift her hands. She lifted her voice just enough to set the table. "John, chapter 14, verse 27, she said, "because peace is daily bread. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you." They read Mom and Caleb and Zoe and Hannah and Nell and Jordan and Kayla and Aaron and Ben and Pop, and names they hadn't known in the spring. Names they would remember when winter came back for its turn. When the last chair found its stack, Evan stood in the doorway with the keys in his hand and looked at the small brass plaque. He thought of the chapel lamp, the vending machine cup, the thunder that had sounded like furniture being moved in the sky. He smiled because this room had become what he hadn't known he needed. A way to stay human in a world that kept breaking. A place to look at the dark and say God's name and each other's until light remembered how to behave. He locked up, slid the keys into his pocket beside the cross, and stepped into a night that had nothing to prove. He said the prayer that had once been a rope and was now a road. "Jesus, hold us together." A car turned the corner with its headlights low. Somewhere a hinge declined to squeak. Across town, a jar blinked under a soda machine. Down the block, chalk waited for morning. The lamp room exhaled. Evan walked toward tomorrow with enough light for the next step.